Tonight, we climb a narrow ladder to a quiet tower where incense hangs in the air and the future is whispered rather than declared. This is the story of Sybill Trelawney, a journey into the life of a woman long dismissed as eccentric, dramatic, even foolish, yet whose voice quietly shaped the fate of the wizarding world. Was she a fraud wrapped in shawls and superstition, or a true seer burdened by a gift she could never control? As we drift through smoke, starlight, prophecy, and war, we will uncover the fragile truth behind the uncertain oracle, and discover how the most overlooked figure in Hogwarts may have been one of its most important, the legacy of Cassandra. Long before Sybill Trelawney ever sat in a dim tower room surrounded by drifting incense and dusty crystal balls, long before generations of Hogwarts students whispered about her strange warnings and dramatic predictions, the name Trelawney already carried a reputation that moved quietly through the wizarding world, like an old legend that refused to fade. In wizarding history, there are many families known for particular talents, some known for powerful magic, some for political influence, and some for dangerous ambition. But the Trelawney family became known for something far more mysterious and far less understood, a reputation built not on spells or wealth, but on the strange and uncertain ability known as the sight. The story of that reputation begins centuries earlier with a witch whose name still appears in old magical texts and whispered discussions among historians of divination, a woman named Cassandra Trelawney. Cassandra lived in a time when the wizarding world was very different from the one later generations would know, a time when magical knowledge was often passed quietly between families, and when the practice of divination held a strange place between respect and suspicion. Even in those early years, divination was never considered an exact science, because unlike charms or transfiguration, it could not be tested in clear ways, and because the future itself had a habit of shifting in subtle directions that made prediction difficult to prove. Yet Cassandra Trelawney gained attention because many believed she possessed a rare and powerful form of prophetic sight, one that allowed her to speak about events that had not yet happened with an eerie sense of certainty. Stories about Cassandra slowly spread through the magical community, carried by word of mouth and eventually written into magical records that would survive for centuries. Some accounts described how she would fall into sudden trances, moments when her voice changed and her eyes seemed distant, as if she were looking somewhere beyond the room around her. And during those moments, she would speak strange and often unsettling statements that later appeared to come true. One record describes how she warned of a dangerous magical conflict long before it began, while another tells of a noble wizard whose sudden death she predicted during a quiet gathering that had otherwise been filled with laughter and music. Whether every story about Cassandra was true is impossible to know now, because time has a way of mixing truth with exaggeration. But enough of her predictions appeared to match real events that her reputation as a genuine seer slowly became accepted by many witches and wizards. But even during her lifetime, Cassandra's gift was not universally admired, because divination has always existed in a strange space between belief and doubt, and many respected magical scholars argued that predictions could easily be the result of guesswork, coincidence, or clever observation, rather than supernatural insight. Some people accused Cassandra of dramatics, suggesting that her trances and mysterious warnings were performances designed to impress those around her, while others defended her abilities and pointed to the growing list of predictions that seemed impossible to explain away. The truth may have lived somewhere between those views, because the power of prophecy has always been difficult to understand, and even the most gifted seers often struggle to control when their visions appear or how clearly they can interpret what they see. Over time, Cassandra Trelawney became something more than just a woman with unusual abilities, because her name slowly transformed into a symbol within the world of divination, and generations of witches who studied the practice would read about her predictions as examples of true prophetic sight. Books discussing divination sometimes mentioned her methods, describing how she used objects like crystal balls, enchanted mirrors, and patterns of smoke or liquid to focus her mind on possible futures. Whether these tools actually created visions or simply helped her concentrate is still debated, but the image of Cassandra, surrounded by mystical instruments, slowly became part of wizarding culture, shaping how people imagined the life of a seer. As the years passed and Cassandra eventually died, the legend she left behind did not fade with her, because her family continued to carry the name that had become associated with prophecy. Being part of the Trelawney family meant inheriting more than a surname, because it also meant inheriting a reputation that people expected to continue across generations. In magical society, family legacies often carry strong influence, and many wizarding families take pride in passing down talents, traditions, and achievements to their descendants. Yet the legacy of prophecy is not something that can be easily taught or trained, and that created a strange challenge for those who followed Cassandra's line. Several descendants attempted to practice divination in hopes of continuing the family's connection to prophecy, and some even claimed to experience small flashes of insight or intuition that seemed unusual. But none of them gained the same level of attention or belief that Cassandra had once commanded. Over time, the Trelawney name remained connected to the idea of prophecy, but it slowly began to feel more like a distant echo of greatness rather than an active force within the wizarding world. The family still carried respect in some circles of divination scholars, yet there was also quiet skepticism, because each new generation raised the same question: would another true seer ever appear in the Trelawney line, or had Cassandra been a rare and unrepeatable exception? It was into this complicated legacy that Sybill Trelawney was eventually born, and although the world she entered was separated from Cassandra's time by centuries, the weight of that ancient reputation still lingered around the family name. From the moment people learned that a child had been born into the Trelawney lineage, expectations quietly formed in the minds of those who remembered the old stories. Some believed that the gift of prophecy might return through her, while others assumed the name had already lost its power and that any descendant would simply live an ordinary, magical life. For Sybill, growing up under the shadow of Cassandra's legend meant that her identity was shaped long before she had the chance to understand it herself. When people spoke about the Trelawney family, they often mentioned the ancient seer, whose predictions had once amazed the wizarding world, and those conversations created an unspoken pressure that surrounded the younger members of the family. Carrying a famous name can feel like holding a fragile object that others expect you to protect, because any failure to match that reputation may appear as disappointment rather than simple human limitation. The idea that Sybill might inherit Cassandra's prophetic abilities slowly became part of how others viewed her, even when she was still young and had shown no clear signs of possessing the sight. Some relatives likely watched her carefully for unusual behavior or strange insights, hoping to witness the first evidence that the family gift had returned, while others may have quietly wondered whether the legend had ended with Cassandra long ago. Yet expectations have a powerful way of shaping how a person understands themselves, especially when those expectations are tied to something as mysterious as prophecy. Divination itself does not behave like most branches of magic, because spells can be learned and practiced until they improve, but prophetic visions cannot simply be summoned by effort alone. Those who truly possess the sight often describe it as something that arrives without warning, sometimes in moments of calm, and sometimes in moments of great emotion. And even then, the images or words that appear may be difficult to interpret. Because of this uncertainty, many witches and wizards who study divination spend years attempting to understand whether their impressions of the future are genuine visions or simply products of imagination. For someone like Sybill, whose family history was filled with stories about a powerful seer ancestor, the search for that answer would eventually become deeply personal. The world around her already carried a quiet belief that the Trelawney name belonged to prophecy, and although no one could force the gift to appear, the expectation remained like a faint voice that never completely disappeared. That expectation did not only come from others, but slowly became part of Sybill's own understanding of herself, because when a person grows up hearing the same legend repeated again and again, it becomes difficult not to wonder whether that story might somehow be waiting to continue through them. The legend of Cassandra Trelawney, therefore, did more than create a famous name within magical history, because it also created a shadow that stretched across generations, a shadow filled with admiration, doubt, curiosity, and hope. For Sybill, that shadow would shape the path her life eventually followed, guiding her toward the strange and uncertain world of divination, where the line between genuine prophecy and desperate belief often becomes impossible to see clearly. And although many people in the wizarding world would later laugh at her predictions or dismiss her warnings as exaggeration, few of them ever realized that her story began long before she entered the halls of Hogwarts, beginning instead with a centuries-old legend about a woman whose visions once convinced the magical world that the future could sometimes speak through human voices. A child under expectation. The early years of Sybill Trelawney's life unfolded quietly, far away from the stone towers and enchanted staircases that would one day become her home. And yet even during childhood, there were invisible expectations surrounding her that she could not fully understand, but could certainly feel. She had been born into a family whose name carried a long and unusual history within the wizarding world. And although many wizarding families were proud of their past, the Trelawney legacy carried something more uncertain than power or wealth, because it was tied to the mysterious art of prophecy. Long before Sybill was old enough to understand what prophecy truly meant, people who knew her family already spoke about her in the context of a story that had begun centuries earlier with Cassandra Trelawney, the ancestor whose reputation as a powerful seer had never completely faded from magical history. Growing up in such an environment meant that the name Trelawney was never simply a family name, because it always carried a question attached to it, and that question followed Sybill almost everywhere she went. Adults who visited the family home sometimes spoke about Cassandra's predictions as though they were pieces of a long-standing legend, and conversations often drifted toward the idea that perhaps the gift of prophecy might appear again in a future generation. Sometimes these conversations were spoken openly, and sometimes they were whispered in quieter tones when they believed the children were not paying attention. But even whispers have a way of reaching young ears. And the young Sybill slowly began to understand that people expected something unusual from her. Her childhood environment was not necessarily cruel or unkind, because those around her did not force her to perform or demand that she demonstrate abilities she did not yet have, but the atmosphere around her was shaped by quiet curiosity. Family members watched her carefully during moments that might have seemed ordinary to other children, such as when she stared out a window for a long time or spoke about strange dreams she had experienced during the night. In most families, such moments would simply pass without notice. Yet, in the Trelawney household, they were sometimes examined with gentle interest, because people wondered whether those small behaviors might be early signs of the sight that had once defined the family name. For a child who was still trying to understand the world around her, that kind of attention could feel confusing, because Sybill did not yet know what prophecy truly involved, or why people seemed to expect it from her. She likely heard the story of Cassandra many times while growing up, hearing about the ancestor who could supposedly see events before they happened, and whose predictions had been recorded in magical history. At first, those stories may have sounded exciting, almost like the heroic legends that many wizarding children hear about famous witches and wizards. Yet the difference was that Cassandra's story was not just a distant tale from the past. It was tied directly to Sybill's own identity, and every time someone mentioned it, they were also reminding her that she belonged to the same bloodline. As the years passed and Sybill grew older, the meaning behind those stories slowly began to change in her mind. What had once sounded like an interesting piece of family history began to feel more like a standard she might someday be expected to reach. Children often look to their families to understand who they are supposed to become, and when a family's reputation centers around something unusual, like prophecy, that reputation can quietly shape a child's sense of self, long before they have the ability to question it. For Sybill, the message was subtle but persistent, because the Trelawney name was linked to the idea that someone within the family should possess the rare ability known as the sight. At first, she may have tried to imagine what that ability would feel like, wondering whether it would arrive suddenly like a spark of magic or appear slowly through dreams and feelings that others could not explain. Perhaps she listened closely to stories about how seers sometimes entered trances or experienced visions that came without warning, and perhaps she wondered whether something like that might happen to her one day. Yet childhood curiosity gradually mixed with uncertainty, because no matter how many stories she heard about prophecy, she did not immediately experience anything that felt like a clear sign of such a gift. The absence of obvious visions did not stop people from continuing to wonder, because prophecy is unpredictable and often appears later in life for those who possess it. But for Sybill, the silence where a gift was expected slowly began to create a quiet tension inside her thoughts. Children can sense when adults expect something from them, even when those expectations are never spoken directly. And over time, Sybill began to feel that she was being observed for signs that had not yet appeared. She may have felt a mixture of curiosity and worry whenever someone asked about her dreams or unusual feelings, because each question carried the unspoken hope that she might reveal something extraordinary. As she grew older and began to understand more about the wizarding world, she also began to learn that divination itself was not widely respected by everyone. While some witches and wizards believed strongly in the power of prophecy, others treated it with skepticism, arguing that predictions could easily be the result of guesswork or imagination. This divided opinion created a strange situation for someone like Sybill, because if she ever did show signs of prophecy, people might either admire her or doubt her. And yet, if she showed no signs at all, the family's long history with divination might appear to have ended with her generation. The result was a slow and complicated pressure that did not always come from other people, but began to form within Sybill herself. When a child hears the same story repeated often enough, especially a story about a legendary ancestor, it becomes difficult not to compare oneself to that figure. Cassandra's reputation was built on powerful predictions that seemed to shape real events, and the more Sybill heard about those achievements, the more she may have wondered whether she could ever live up to them. Even though she was still young, the idea of carrying such a legacy could feel both exciting and intimidating. It is during these kinds of early experiences that self-doubt often begins to take shape, not as a loud voice, but as a quiet question that repeats itself in the background of a person's thoughts. For Sybill, that question may have sounded something like this: what if the gift never comes? The longer she lived without experiencing anything that resembled a clear prophetic vision, the more that question likely returned to her mind. She may have wondered whether people were waiting for something from her that she could not give, or whether the famous reputation of the Trelawney family might slowly fade if she failed to continue it. At the same time, she may have tried to reassure herself that prophecy was unpredictable and could appear later in life, because many accounts of seers describe visions that arrive suddenly after years of silence. Yet reassurance does not always remove doubt, especially when a person grows up surrounded by expectations that seem larger than their own experiences. For Sybill, the shadow of Cassandra's legend remained present in the background of her childhood, shaping how others saw her and gradually influencing how she saw herself. The environment in which she grew up, therefore, became a quiet mixture of curiosity, hope, and uncertainty, because the people around her believed that something special might emerge from the Trelawney bloodline once again. They did not know whether Sybill would become the next great seer, or simply another descendant of Cassandra whose life followed a different path. And that uncertainty created a sense of waiting that lingered around her early years. Even when daily life continued in ordinary ways, with lessons, family conversations, and the small routines of magical households, the larger question about prophecy never completely disappeared. Looking back at those early years, it becomes clear that Sybill Trelawney's childhood was shaped less by dramatic events and more by the quiet influence of expectation. She was not yet the eccentric divination professor that Hogwarts students would one day encounter, and she had not yet spoken the prophecies that would affect the future of the wizarding world. Instead, she was simply a child growing up in the shadow of a famous name, trying to understand whether the story of that name would somehow continue through her life or quietly end with her generation. That uncertainty would stay with her as she grew older, slowly guiding her toward the study of divination and the search for answers about her own abilities. The question of whether she truly possessed the sight had not yet been resolved, and the longer it remained unanswered, the more it shaped the thoughts and feelings that followed her into the next stage of her life. What began as childhood curiosity was gradually becoming something deeper and more personal, because the story of Cassandra Trelawney was no longer just a legend from the past. It was a shadow that Sybill carried with her, a shadow filled with expectation, doubt, and the growing desire to discover whether the future truly had a voice waiting inside her, searching for the gift. As Sybill Trelawney moved from childhood into her teenage years, the quiet expectations that had surrounded her for so long slowly became something more personal and more pressing, because she was now old enough to understand that the question hanging over her family name had not yet been answered. The legend of Cassandra Trelawney was no longer just a distant story told during family conversations, but a piece of history that seemed to follow Sybill wherever she went, shaping the way others looked at her and influencing the way she looked at herself. During these years, many young witches and wizards begin to discover their strengths within magic, learning which areas come naturally and which ones require more effort. But for Sybill, the search for her place within magic was tied to a far more mysterious possibility, because she wanted to know whether the ancient gift of prophecy had somehow found its way into her life. The problem with prophecy, however, is that it does not behave like most forms of magic, because spells can be practiced again and again until they improve, and potions can be carefully studied until their results become predictable. But the sight is something far less cooperative. Those who claim to possess true prophetic ability often describe it as something that appears without warning and without control, arriving in moments that cannot be planned or repeated on command. This made Sybill's search for answers both fascinating and frustrating, because there was no clear test she could perform to prove whether the gift existed within her. As a teenager, she likely spent many quiet hours thinking about the stories she had heard throughout her childhood, replaying them in her mind while wondering how Cassandra might have first discovered her abilities. Did the ancient seer suddenly fall into a trance one day without explanation, or did her visions begin as small hints that grew stronger over time? No one could answer those questions with certainty, and the lack of clear guidance meant that Sybill had to explore the world of divination largely on her own, experimenting with the methods that witches and wizards had used for centuries in their attempts to glimpse pieces of the future. One of the first tools she may have explored was the simple practice of reading tea leaves, a method of divination that had long been used in magical culture, as well as in certain parts of the non-magical world. The practice itself is quiet and patient, requiring the reader to study the patterns formed by tea leaves left behind in a cup after the liquid has been drained away. Some people believe those patterns can reveal symbols that hint at future events, while others see them as nothing more than random shapes that the human mind tries to interpret. For Sybill, however, the act of studying those shapes may have felt like opening a small door toward the unknown, because each swirl or cluster of leaves offered the possibility that she might notice something meaningful hidden within the pattern. She likely spent long moments staring into the bottom of cups, tilting them slightly to catch the light, and tracing the outlines of shapes that seemed almost familiar, sometimes convincing herself that she could see animals, letters, or objects forming among the dark fragments of leaves. On some days, those shapes might have felt promising, as though they carried hints of something waiting to happen, while on other days they appeared meaningless and scattered, leaving her unsure whether she was truly seeing signs or simply imagining them because she wanted them to exist. Tea leaves were only one path among many in the wide and uncertain practice of divination, and as Sybill continued her search, she would have encountered other tools that promised deeper insight into the future. Crystal balls were perhaps the most famous symbol of prophecy, and their polished surfaces had fascinated seers for generations because they seemed to invite the mind to wander into hidden possibilities. Gazing into a crystal ball requires patience and concentration, because the seer must allow their thoughts to become calm while focusing on the smooth depths of the glass, waiting to see whether images or impressions begin to appear. For a teenager already surrounded by the expectation of prophecy, the experience of sitting alone with a crystal ball may have carried a strong mixture of hope and pressure. Sybill might have dimmed the lights around her, allowing the reflective surface of the crystal to capture the soft glow of candles, and then leaned forward to watch the shifting reflections that moved across its curved surface. Sometimes the reflections might have looked like vague shapes or movements, and for a moment she may have wondered whether those shapes were the beginnings of a vision. But just as often, they would fade into nothing more than ordinary patterns of light. Another practice she may have explored involved card reading methods similar to tarot, where symbolic images printed on cards are arranged in patterns and then interpreted to reveal possible future outcomes. Each card carries traditional meanings connected to ideas like change, danger, opportunity, or hidden knowledge, and the reader attempts to understand how those meanings might connect to the person seeking guidance. For Sybill, these cards might have felt like small windows into a larger mystery, because the images were rich with symbolism that seemed to invite interpretation. Yet even with these tools spread out before her, the question that had followed her since childhood still remained unanswered. The patterns in tea leaves sometimes appeared meaningful and sometimes appeared random. The crystal ball reflected shapes that might have been visions or might have been tricks of light, and the cards offered interpretations that could shift depending on how they were arranged. None of these experiences gave her the clear and undeniable proof that she truly possessed the sight, and that uncertainty slowly began to affect how she viewed herself. Moments of doubt likely arrived more often during these years, especially when she compared her own experiences with the powerful stories told about Cassandra Trelawney. Those stories described dramatic trances and predictions that seemed impossible to mistake for anything else. Yet Sybill's experiments with divination felt far less certain. She might have wondered whether the gift had simply skipped her generation, or whether she lacked the natural ability that had once made her ancestor famous within the wizarding world. It is during such moments of uncertainty that people sometimes begin to change the way they present themselves to others, and in Sybill's case, the early hints of her later personality may have started to appear during these teenage years. If she could not always rely on clear visions to prove her connection to prophecy, she might have discovered that atmosphere and performance could help create the feeling that something mystical was happening. Speaking in a mysterious tone, describing possibilities in dramatic ways, and surrounding herself with objects connected to divination could all make the experience feel more convincing, both to herself and to those around her. This does not necessarily mean that Sybill intended to deceive anyone, because the line between genuine belief and theatrical presentation can be very thin, especially when someone deeply wants to believe that their abilities are real. By speaking about the future in ways that sounded mysterious and powerful, she may have been trying to give shape to the uncertain feelings she experienced while practicing divination. If a pattern in tea leaves looked even slightly meaningful, she might have described it with confidence in order to see whether events later seemed to match her interpretation. Over time, these habits slowly grew into the style of behavior that people would later associate with Sybill Trelawney, a style that mixed genuine fascination with prophecy and a strong sense of drama. Her gestures may have become more expressive when discussing visions, her voice perhaps lowering when speaking about dark possibilities, and her explanations of divination likely grew more detailed and elaborate as she continued practicing. These traits did not appear suddenly, but developed gradually as she tried to understand how to navigate a world that expected her to possess a rare and unpredictable gift. The teenage years of Sybill's life were therefore filled with quiet searching, long hours spent studying symbols and reflections, and a growing mixture of belief and doubt that shaped the person she was becoming. She had not yet experienced the moment that would eventually prove her connection to prophecy in a way that no one could ignore, and the uncertainty surrounding her abilities remained a powerful influence on her thoughts and behavior. Yet the experiences of these years were important because they slowly built the habits, the language, and the dramatic style that would later define her presence within the world of divination. What began as a simple search for proof of the sight gradually transformed into something more complex, because the act of practicing prophecy began to shape Sybill's identity even before she knew whether her visions were real. Each cup of tea leaves, each silent moment staring into a crystal ball, and each arrangement of symbolic cards brought her one step closer to understanding the strange path her life would follow. And although she still lived with uncertainty during these years, the search itself was quietly preparing her for a future that would soon unfold in ways she could never have predicted. The interview at the Hog's Head. By the time Sybill Trelawney had reached adulthood, her life had already been shaped by years of searching for signs of the gift that many believed should exist within her. Yet the clear and undeniable proof of true prophecy had still not appeared in a way that convinced either her or the wider wizarding world. She had spent much of her earlier life exploring the many methods of divination that had been practiced for centuries, studying symbols in tea leaves, staring into crystal balls while waiting for images to form, and interpreting dreams or patterns that might carry hidden meaning. Some people who encountered her during those years likely saw a woman who spoke with dramatic confidence about the future, while others may have quietly doubted whether her abilities were genuine. Yet behind that outward performance, there remained a deeper question that followed Sybill everywhere she went, a question that had existed since her childhood beneath the shadow of her famous ancestor, because she still did not know whether she truly possessed the sight. It was during this uncertain stage of her life that she made a decision that would eventually place her directly at the center of one of the most important moments in modern wizarding history. At some point, she sought an opportunity to become a teacher of divination at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, the ancient castle where generations of young witches and wizards learned the foundations of magic. Teaching at Hogwarts was considered one of the most respected positions in the magical world, because it meant shaping the knowledge and abilities of future generations. For Sybill, the possibility of such a position may have carried both hope and risk, because it offered a chance to establish herself as a true authority on divination, yet it also placed her abilities under the judgment of some of the most experienced magical minds alive. The person responsible for deciding whether she would receive that opportunity was Albus Dumbledore, the headmaster of Hogwarts, and a wizard whose reputation for wisdom and power had spread far beyond the walls of the school. Dumbledore was known for his calm intelligence and his ability to look deeper into situations than most others could, which meant that anyone seeking a teaching position would have to convince him not only of their knowledge, but also of their genuine connection to the subject they hoped to teach. For someone like Sybill, whose own certainty about her prophetic abilities was still fragile, the idea of facing such scrutiny may have felt both exciting and intimidating. The meeting between Sybill Trelawney and Albus Dumbledore did not take place inside the grand halls of Hogwarts itself, but instead occurred at a small and rather rough establishment located in the wizarding village near the school. The building was known as the Hog's Head Inn, a place that carried a very different atmosphere from the elegant corridors of Hogwarts. Unlike the famous Three Broomsticks Tavern that attracted many students and visitors with its warm lights and friendly conversations, the Hog's Head was quieter, darker, and often filled with travelers who preferred privacy rather than lively company. When Sybill arrived at the inn for her interview, the setting around her may have seemed almost strangely appropriate for a discussion about prophecy. The Hog's Head was known for its dim lighting and worn furniture, and the air inside often carried the smell of old wood and smoke that had settled into the walls over many years. Conversations within the inn tended to remain quiet and guarded, and the shadows in its corners gave the room a feeling of secrecy that matched the mysterious nature of divination itself. For someone accustomed to surrounding herself with mystical objects and dim candlelight, the atmosphere may have felt familiar, even if the location itself was far from impressive. Dumbledore had arranged to meet her in one of the rooms within the inn where they could speak privately about the possibility of her teaching at Hogwarts. The conversation likely began in a fairly ordinary way, with questions about her background, her understanding of divination, and her thoughts about how the subject should be taught to young witches and wizards. Dumbledore was known for approaching such discussions with patience and curiosity, listening carefully before forming his judgments. Sybill may have spoken about the traditions of divination, about the ways symbols and visions could reveal hidden truths, and about the importance of teaching students to trust their instincts when interpreting signs of the future. Yet, according to later accounts, Dumbledore did not appear fully convinced that Sybill possessed the genuine prophetic ability that might justify creating a permanent divination teaching position at Hogwarts. Divination had always been one of the more controversial subjects within magical education, because many witches and wizards considered it unreliable or overly dependent on interpretation. As their conversation continued, it seemed possible that the meeting would end without any agreement, leaving Sybill to continue her search for recognition elsewhere. Then something strange and unexpected occurred, an event that would forever change the direction of Sybill's life and the fate of the wizarding world itself. During the interview, as the conversation was reaching its final moments, Sybill suddenly began to behave in a way that neither she nor Dumbledore had anticipated. Her voice changed in a dramatic and unsettling way, becoming deeper and harsher than her normal speaking tone, and her body appeared to stiffen as if she were no longer fully aware of her surroundings. Dumbledore later described the moment as a true prophetic trance, a state that had rarely been witnessed even among those who claimed to practice divination. In that moment, Sybill seemed to lose control of her normal thoughts, and the words that followed did not sound like the careful explanations she had been offering during the interview. Instead, her voice spoke with a strange authority, delivering a message that sounded less like a prediction and more like a declaration of something that would eventually unfold. The prophecy she spoke described the coming of a child who would have the power to defeat a dark wizard whose name had already begun to spread fear across the magical world. That dark wizard was Lord Voldemort, a figure who had been gathering followers and spreading violence in his pursuit of power. The prophecy suggested that the child, destined to challenge him, would be born to parents who had already opposed him, and that the struggle between them would shape the future of the wizarding world. As the words left her mouth, the atmosphere within the small room of the Hog's Head must have felt heavy with significance, because Dumbledore immediately understood that he was witnessing something rare and genuine. Unlike the theatrical descriptions of prophecy that sometimes surrounded divination, this moment carried a sense of authenticity that could not easily be dismissed. Sybill's voice during the trance sounded distant and controlled by something beyond her conscious mind, and the message she delivered seemed too specific and powerful to be mistaken for an ordinary guess about the future. What makes this moment even more remarkable is that Sybill herself had no memory of speaking those words once the trance ended. After finishing the prophecy, she simply returned to her normal state, appearing confused about why Dumbledore was suddenly studying her with such intense interest. From her perspective, the interview had continued as usual, and she remained unaware that she had just delivered one of the most important prophecies of the age. Dumbledore, however, understood the significance of what he had heard, and his view of Sybill Trelawney changed instantly. The prophecy had revealed that she possessed genuine prophetic ability, even if she could not control when those visions appeared or remember what she said while delivering them. This discovery convinced him that Sybill needed to remain within the safety of Hogwarts, not only because she deserved the opportunity to teach, but also because the information she had revealed could place her in danger if it ever reached the wrong ears. The interview, that had begun as a simple discussion about a teaching job, therefore ended with a decision that would shape the future of both Sybill Trelawney and the wizarding world. She was offered the position of divination professor at Hogwarts, and from that moment forward her life would become tied to the ancient castle where she would spend years teaching students about the uncertain art of prophecy. Yet the true importance of that meeting at the Hog's Head extended far beyond Sybill's personal career, because the prophecy she had spoken would soon set in motion a chain of events that no one in that small room could fully predict. At the time, the words had simply described a future confrontation between a child and a dark wizard, but the meaning behind them would gradually grow clearer as the years passed. What began as a quiet interview in a dim room above an old inn had unknowingly created the foundation for a story that would reshape the wizarding world in ways that even the most gifted seer could never completely foresee. The listener behind the door. The strange moment that took place inside the quiet room of the Hog's Head Inn might have remained a secret known only to Sybill Trelawney and Albus Dumbledore. Yet, unknown to both of them, the words spoken during that prophetic trance had already reached another pair of ears. The small inn where the meeting occurred was not a place of perfect privacy, because the building itself was old and its walls were thin in places. And like many taverns that served travelers from different parts of the wizarding world, it was also a place where people sometimes listened carefully to conversations that were not meant for them. In the hallway outside the room where the interview took place, a young wizard had paused long enough to hear a portion of the prophecy that Sybill had spoken while trapped within that mysterious trance. That young wizard was Severus Snape, a man who at that time had not yet become the quiet and watchful professor that students at Hogwarts would later encounter. During this earlier period of his life, Snape was deeply involved with a growing group of dark witches and wizards who followed the rising power of Lord Voldemort. These followers believed that Voldemort represented a new order for the magical world, one where those who possessed magical bloodlines would rule without opposition, and they were willing to serve him with loyalty that often crossed into cruelty. Snape's presence at the Hog's Head that day was not connected to Sybill Trelawney's interview, and there is no clear sign that he had arrived with any intention of overhearing a prophecy that could influence the future of the wizarding world. Yet chance has always played a strange role in history, and sometimes the smallest accidents create consequences that echo for many years. While moving through the inn, Snape noticed voices coming from behind the door of the room where Dumbledore and Sybill were speaking. At first, it may have sounded like an ordinary conversation between two people discussing a job, something that would not normally attract much attention. But then the tone of the voices changed. When Sybill entered her prophetic trance, her voice shifted in a dramatic and unnatural way, becoming rougher and deeper than her normal speaking voice. And the strange rhythm of the words she spoke would have immediately caught the attention of anyone nearby. To someone like Snape, who was already involved in a world of secrets and hidden information, hearing such unusual speech might have seemed worth investigating. He moved closer to the door, listening carefully as the words of the prophecy began to form. The message described the coming of a child who would be born to parents that had already defied the dark wizard Voldemort, and it suggested that this child would possess the power to challenge or even destroy him. Even hearing only part of the prophecy would have been enough to make its meaning clear to someone who served the dark wizard so closely. The idea that a child could someday become a threat to Voldemort was not something his followers would ignore, because their loyalty depended on the belief that their master was nearly unstoppable. Yet Snape did not hear the entire prophecy. According to later accounts, he was interrupted before he could listen to the full message, because the owner of the Hog's Head noticed him lingering outside the door and forced him to leave the area. That interruption meant that Snape carried away only a fragment of the prophecy, the part that described a child born to parents who had opposed Voldemort and who might possess the power to defeat him. The missing portion of the prophecy, which explained important details about how the future would unfold, remained known only to Dumbledore. Despite hearing only a partial message, Snape immediately understood that the information he had discovered would be valuable to Voldemort. At that time, Snape was eager to prove his usefulness within the Dark Wizard's circle, and delivering such a warning could strengthen his position among the followers who competed for their master's approval. Without hesitation, he carried what he had heard back to Voldemort, explaining that a prophecy existed predicting the rise of a child who could threaten his power. The effect of this report was immediate and dangerous, because Voldemort was a man who feared very few things but had an intense desire to eliminate any threat before it had the chance to grow. When he learned about the prophecy, he began searching for the child it described, studying the details that Snape had overheard in order to determine which family might match the conditions spoken during the trance. The prophecy mentioned that the child would be born to parents who had defied Voldemort 3 times, and that description eventually led him to focus on a small group of witches and wizards who had openly resisted his rise. This moment marked the beginning of a chain reaction that would soon spread across the wizarding world like a series of falling stones knocking against one another. Voldemort's decision to hunt for the child described in the prophecy created a wave of fear among those who opposed him, because they understood that once he targeted someone, he rarely abandoned the pursuit. The prophecy itself had not yet been fulfilled, and the child it described had not even been born, yet the simple knowledge that such a future might exist was enough to push Voldemort toward action. For Sybill Trelawney, however, none of these events were visible or even imaginable, because she remained completely unaware of the role she had played in setting this chain of events into motion. When her trance ended during the interview at the Hog's Head, she returned to her normal state with no memory of the prophecy she had delivered. To her, the meeting with Dumbledore seemed like a difficult but ordinary conversation about a teaching position, and she left the inn without realizing that her words had already begun shaping the future. This lack of awareness would become one of the most tragic aspects of Sybill's story, because she spent many years living inside the walls of Hogwarts, while the prophecy she had spoken continued to influence the world outside. Wars and conflicts would rise and fall around her, and the names connected to that prophecy would eventually become some of the most famous figures in modern magical history. Yet she herself remained almost completely separated from the knowledge of how deeply she had affected those events. Meanwhile, the consequences of Snape's actions continued to grow. Voldemort's search for the child described in the prophecy eventually led him to a young family who matched the conditions he had heard about, and his decision to act on that information would later become one of the most important turning points in the struggle between his followers and those who opposed him. What began as a quiet conversation overheard through a thin door had now grown into a plan that would soon lead to violence and tragedy. Looking back on that moment inside the Hog's Head Inn, it is striking how fragile the chain of events truly was. If Snape had walked through the hallway a few minutes earlier or a few minutes later, he might never have heard the prophecy at all. If the owner of the inn had removed him from the hallway sooner, he might not have heard enough words to understand the meaning of what Sybill was saying. History sometimes turns on moments so small that they almost disappear when viewed from a distance. Yet those moments can change the lives of countless people. For Sybill Trelawney, the irony is especially powerful because she was both the source of the prophecy and the person who understood it the least. The words that left her mouth during that strange trance carried the weight of the future, yet she never remembered speaking them and never fully realized the role she had played in shaping the destiny of the wizarding world. While others debated the meaning of the prophecy and acted upon its warning, she continued living her life as a divination teacher, surrounded by crystal balls and cups of tea leaves, still searching for signs of the future in the same uncertain ways she had practiced for years. The hidden listener outside that door therefore became one of the most important figures in the unfolding story, because the decision made by Severus Snape to report the prophecy to Voldemort transformed a private moment of prophecy into a dangerous piece of information that would ignite fear, violence, and eventually war. And through it all, the woman whose voice had delivered the prophecy remained unaware that her words had set the first spark that would light the path toward one of the most famous conflicts in magical history. The child marked by prophecy. The prophecy that had been spoken during Sybill Trelawney's strange trance inside the room at the Hog's Head did not remain a quiet piece of information for very long, because once the words reached Lord Voldemort through the report given by Severus Snape, the meaning of those words began to grow into something far more dangerous than anyone present at the original meeting could have imagined. Voldemort was not a man who ignored warnings about the future, especially when those warnings suggested that someone might someday rise with the power to defeat him. His rise to power had been built on careful planning, ruthless actions, and a deep fear of losing control. And because of this, he treated any potential threat as something that must be removed before it had the chance to grow. The fragment of prophecy that Snape delivered described a child who would be born to parents who had already defied Voldemort several times, and it hinted that this child would possess the ability to challenge his power in a way that others could not. Although Snape had not heard the full prophecy, the portion he delivered was enough to alarm Voldemort, because the idea that someone might be born with the destiny to oppose him struck directly at the foundation of his belief that he was unstoppable. Rather than dismissing the prophecy as superstition or coincidence, he began studying it carefully, searching for any clue that might reveal the identity of the child it described. At that time, several witches and wizards had openly resisted Voldemort and his growing group of followers, yet the prophecy gave specific details that helped narrow his search. It spoke of a child born to parents who had already defied him 3 times, and that clue guided his attention toward 2 families who matched the description. Both families had fought against his influence and refused to join his cause, and both were expecting children during the time period mentioned in the prophecy. Voldemort began to consider which of those children might represent the greater threat, because he believed that eliminating the child before it could grow would prevent the prophecy from ever coming true. In the end, his attention settled on one particular family, the young couple known as James Potter and Lily Potter, 2 witches and wizards who had repeatedly opposed Voldemort during the growing conflict that would later be known as the First Wizarding War. They were brave members of the resistance group known as the Order of the Phoenix, and their refusal to support Voldemort had already made them enemies in his eyes. When their infant son was born, a child named Harry Potter, Voldemort began to believe that this child might be the one described by the prophecy. It is important to understand that Voldemort's decision was not based on certainty, but on interpretation, because the prophecy itself did not clearly name the child or explain every detail of how the future would unfold. Prophecies often speak in ways that allow multiple meanings, leaving those who hear them to decide how they should be understood. Voldemort believed he was acting to prevent the prophecy from becoming real, yet by choosing a target and moving against it, he may have been helping to create the very future he feared. As Voldemort prepared to act against the Potter family, the atmosphere within the wizarding world was already filled with tension and fear. His followers were spreading violence and intimidation, and many families who opposed him lived in constant danger because they knew that resisting his rule could make them targets. James and Lily Potter understood this danger very well, yet they continued to stand against him, believing that surrendering to his vision of the wizarding world would only allow darkness to spread further. When word reached Voldemort that the Potters had gone into hiding to protect their child, he became even more determined to find them. The prophecy had convinced him that allowing the child to grow could one day lead to his downfall, and his desire to remain undefeated drove him to pursue the family relentlessly. Eventually, he discovered their location, hidden in the quiet village of Godric's Hollow, where they believed they were safe from his reach. The night he chose to attack the Potter home would become one of the most important and tragic moments in modern magical history. Voldemort arrived alone, confident in his power and certain that he could eliminate the threat described by the prophecy before anyone had the chance to interfere. Inside the small house, James and Lily Potter were caring for their infant son, unaware that the dark wizard they had fought against for years had already reached their doorstep. When Voldemort entered the house, he confronted James Potter first, and despite James's courage, the encounter was brief and devastating, because Voldemort's power during that period of the war was immense, and few could stand against him directly. After killing James, he moved further into the house, where Lily stood protecting the small crib that held her child. Voldemort offered her the chance to step aside, because he was focused only on the child described in the prophecy, yet Lily refused to abandon her son, even when she knew the danger she faced. Her refusal created a moment of powerful sacrifice that would later become central to the story of the prophecy itself. Instead of stepping aside, she chose to shield her child with her own life, standing between Voldemort and the crib, despite knowing that she could not defeat him. When Voldemort cast the spell intended to kill the child, something unexpected happened, something that even the Dark Wizard, with all his knowledge of magic, had not anticipated. The magic created by Lily's sacrifice formed a powerful protection around the infant Harry, a protection that caused Voldemort's deadly curse to rebound upon the one who cast it. In that instant, the Dark Wizard, who had terrified the wizarding world for years, was struck by his own spell, and the force of the curse destroyed his physical body, leaving only a fragment of his life behind. The house itself was partially destroyed by the explosion of magic, yet the small child within the crib survived. News of the event spread quickly through the wizarding world, and many people began to believe that the child mentioned in the prophecy had already played a role in Voldemort's fall. The infant Harry Potter, who had no understanding of what had happened that night, suddenly became known as the boy who survived the most feared wizard of the age. The prophecy spoken by Sybill Trelawney months earlier had begun to unfold in ways that were both tragic and remarkable, shaping the future of the wizarding world in ways that no one could have predicted with complete certainty. Yet one of the most remarkable aspects of this unfolding story remained the fact that Sybill herself still had no memory of the prophecy that had started it all. While the wizarding world celebrated the fall of Voldemort and mourned the deaths of those lost during the war, she continued her life, largely unaware that the words she had spoken during that brief trance had influenced the path that led to these events. The child marked by prophecy had survived, the Dark Wizard had fallen, and the legend of the prophecy itself began to spread quietly among those who knew its origin. Looking back on these events, it becomes clear that the prophecy did not simply predict the future but helped shape it. Because Voldemort's decision to act upon the prophecy created the circumstances that allowed it to begin coming true. By targeting the child he believed would threaten him, he unknowingly placed himself on the path toward the very defeat he feared. In this way, the prophecy spoken by Sybill Trelawney became more than a prediction, because it became part of the chain of choices and actions that formed the story of the wizarding world during one of its darkest periods. Arrival at Hogwarts. In the months that followed the strange interview at the Hog's Head Inn, the life of Sybill Trelawney quietly shifted in a direction that would eventually define the rest of her career and reputation within the wizarding world. The meeting with Albus Dumbledore had begun as a simple conversation about whether she might be suitable to teach the mysterious subject of divination. Yet, by the time it ended, the headmaster had witnessed something that convinced him she possessed a rare and genuine connection to prophecy. Although Sybill herself remained unaware of the importance of the words she had spoken while trapped inside that sudden trance, Dumbledore clearly understood that what he had heard could not be ignored. For many years, Dumbledore had been cautious about the subject of divination, because within the wizarding world it had always been one of the least reliable branches of magical study. Unlike charms, potions, or transfiguration, which could be practiced and tested repeatedly, divination depended on interpretation and intuition, which made it difficult to separate genuine visions from imagination or guesswork. Because of this uncertainty, the subject was sometimes treated with skepticism, even within respected magical institutions. Yet the prophecy that had emerged from Sybill during that interview was something different, something powerful enough to convince Dumbledore that she carried the unpredictable gift known as the Sight. His decision to offer her a position at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry was therefore influenced by more than simple curiosity about her teaching ability. Dumbledore understood that the prophecy she had spoken could place her in danger if it ever became widely known, because information about the future had a way of attracting attention from those who wished to control it. The Dark Wizard, who would later become the focus of that prophecy, Lord Voldemort, had already begun gathering power during that period, and Dumbledore suspected that any seer connected to such a prophecy might eventually become a target. By bringing Sybill to Hogwarts, Dumbledore was not only giving her the chance to teach, but also providing her with a form of protection. Hogwarts was one of the safest places in the wizarding world, guarded by powerful magical defenses and surrounded by loyal staff members who were capable of protecting the school against threats. Within those ancient stone walls, Sybill could live and work without attracting the kind of attention that might follow her if she remained alone in the wider wizarding world. The decision was therefore both practical and compassionate, because it allowed her to continue practicing divination while remaining under the quiet protection of the headmaster, who understood the importance of her gift. When Sybill first arrived at Hogwarts, she likely experienced a mixture of excitement and nervous anticipation, because the castle had long been known as the heart of magical learning in Britain. Generations of witches and wizards had walked through its halls, studying spells and magical theory beneath the watchful eyes of teachers who were among the most skilled in their fields. For someone who had spent years searching for recognition as a true practitioner of divination, being invited to join the faculty of such an institution must have felt like a moment of validation, even though she still did not fully understand why Dumbledore had chosen to trust her. Her assigned home within the castle was located high above the main corridors, in a part of the school known as the North Tower, a place that seemed perfectly suited to the strange and quiet art she would teach. The tower stood apart from many of the busier areas of the castle, rising toward the sky in a narrow spiral that required students to climb long staircases before reaching the divination classroom. This physical separation from the rest of Hogwarts created a feeling that the subject itself existed slightly outside the ordinary flow of magical education, as though the study of prophecy required distance from the distractions of daily life. The room that would become Sybill Trelawney's classroom was not arranged like the other classrooms within Hogwarts. Instead of neat rows of desks and clear windows that allowed bright sunlight to fill the space, the room gradually transformed into something closer to a small mystical chamber filled with soft shadows and unusual objects. Sybill herself played a large role in shaping this environment, because she believed that divination required the right atmosphere to encourage visions and interpretation. Over time, the room filled with delicate teacups, small tables, shelves of mysterious objects, and the faint scent of incense drifting slowly through the air. Curtains were often drawn across the windows, allowing only filtered light to enter the room, which created a dim and dreamlike setting that made students feel as though they had stepped into a different world. Instead of the clear and direct lighting found in other parts of the castle, the divination classroom relied on the soft glow of lamps and candles, which cast shifting shadows across the walls and added to the sense of mystery. Crystal balls began appearing on small tables throughout the room, their smooth surfaces reflecting the dim light and inviting curious students to stare into their depths while attempting to interpret shapes and patterns that seemed to form within the glass. Shelves held strange books about dreams, symbols, and ancient methods of prediction, and the overall feeling of the classroom slowly became one of quiet uncertainty, as though the future itself might reveal a hidden message at any moment. Sybill herself also became part of this carefully crafted atmosphere, because her personal style of teaching divination was deeply connected to the sense of mystery she believed surrounded the practice. She often spoke in dramatic tones when describing possible dangers or changes that might appear in the future, and her gestures were expressive in ways that made her lessons feel more like performances than ordinary classroom instruction. Some students found this style fascinating, while others quietly questioned whether her predictions were genuine or simply exaggerated interpretations. Yet even as she created this mystical environment around her classroom, there remained a quiet truth that only Dumbledore fully understood. The real evidence of Sybill's prophetic ability had already appeared once during the interview at the Hog's Head, yet she herself had no memory of that moment. In her daily life, she continued practicing divination in the same uncertain ways she had used for years, studying symbols and patterns, while hoping that true visions might eventually appear again. For Dumbledore, this situation created an unusual responsibility, because he knew that Sybill possessed genuine prophetic power, even if she could not control it. He allowed her to teach divination because the subject deserved a place within magical education. Yet he also understood that her true importance to the future might only appear during rare moments when the sight revealed itself without warning. keeping her within the safety of Hogwarts ensured that when those moments arrived, they would be witnessed and understood by someone who recognized their value. As the years passed, the North Tower classroom slowly became known throughout the school as one of the most unusual places within Hogwarts. Students who climbed the long staircase to attend divination lessons often joked about the heavy scent of incense or the dim lighting that made it difficult to see clearly, yet the experience also left a lasting impression on many of them. The classroom felt different from the rest of the castle, almost as though it existed in a space where imagination and possibility were allowed to wander freely. In this quiet tower room, Sybill Trelawney began the life that would define her public reputation as the divination professor of Hogwarts, surrounded by crystal balls, teacups, and the drifting smoke of incense that seemed to curl endlessly through the air. The atmosphere she created reflected her deep desire to believe in the mystery of prophecy, even though the greatest prophecy she had ever spoken remained hidden within her memory. And high above the busy halls of Hogwarts, far from the laughter and noise of other classrooms, she continued teaching the uncertain art of divination, while the future she had once predicted slowly unfolded beyond the walls of the castle. Teaching the art of divination. Once Sybill Trelawney settled into her life within the quiet heights of the North Tower at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, her days slowly began to follow a rhythm that revolved around the strange and often misunderstood subject she had been hired to teach. Divination was unlike most other areas of magical study taught at Hogwarts, and because of that difference, the lessons she conducted in her softly lit classroom quickly gained a reputation among students as one of the most unusual experiences within the entire castle. While other subjects focused on precise spells, carefully measured potions, or the transformation of objects through clear magical rules, divination invited students into a world where certainty was rare and interpretation was often more important than strict accuracy. Sybill herself believed strongly that the practice of divination required a particular state of mind, one that allowed the imagination to wander while also remaining alert for subtle signs that might reveal hidden truths about the future. Because of this belief, her classroom environment was carefully arranged to encourage a sense of mystery rather than clear structure. The heavy curtains drawn across the windows softened the daylight that tried to enter the room, and the warm glow of small lamps and candles created shadows that flickered across the walls. The air often carried the smell of incense, drifting slowly through the space, giving students the feeling that they had stepped into a place where the ordinary rules of time and logic might behave differently. The tables inside the classroom were small and round, rather than arranged in straight rows like those found in other subjects, and each table was usually set with delicate teacups, saucers, and small pots of tea that students would eventually use during their lessons. Sybill often encouraged her students to settle comfortably into their chairs before beginning a session, speaking in a slow and slightly dramatic tone that suggested they were about to explore something ancient and mysterious. For many students, the experience felt very different from their other classes, because instead of copying instructions from a board or practicing spells with their wands, they were asked to look inward and trust their instincts. One of the first and most common techniques Sybill introduced was the reading of tea leaves, a practice that had existed for centuries in both magical and non-magical cultures. The process began in a fairly simple way, with students drinking a cup of tea while leaving a small amount of liquid and leaves behind at the bottom of the cup. Once the tea was finished, the student would gently turn the cup upside down onto the saucer and then lift it again, allowing the remaining leaves to form patterns along the inside surface of the cup. Sybill would then instruct the students to examine these patterns carefully, searching for shapes that might resemble symbols or objects connected to certain meanings. She explained that some shapes might represent animals, letters, or familiar items such as a crown, a heart, or a winding road, and each of these images could hint at something that might happen in the future. The task required patience and imagination, because the shapes formed by the tea leaves were rarely clear or obvious, and students often needed to tilt their cups in different directions, before convincing themselves they could see anything meaningful. Reactions to this exercise varied widely among the students who attended her lessons. Some approached the activity with genuine curiosity, leaning close to their cups while tracing the outlines of shapes they believed they could see among the leaves. These students often asked Sybill many questions, eager to learn how different symbols might be interpreted and whether certain combinations of shapes could reveal more detailed predictions. For them, the practice of divination felt exciting, almost like solving a puzzle that might hold secret knowledge about the future. Other students, however, found the exercise more difficult to take seriously. To them, the shapes inside the cups appeared random and confusing, and they struggled to understand how anyone could reliably connect those patterns to real events that had not yet happened. These students sometimes exchanged quiet smiles or amused glances with their friends while pretending to search for symbols they did not truly believe existed. Although they followed Sybill's instructions politely, they remained skeptical about whether divination could ever produce results as dependable as the magic they practiced in other classes. Crystal ball gazing formed another important part of Sybill's teaching, and the classroom contained many glass spheres placed on small cushions or stands upon the tables. These crystal balls reflected the dim light of the room in soft and shifting patterns, and Sybill explained that students should stare into the depths of the glass while clearing their minds of ordinary thoughts. According to her lessons, the goal was to allow faint images or impressions to appear within the crystal, revealing hints about future events that might otherwise remain hidden. For many students, this practice required a great deal of patience, because staring into the smooth surface of a crystal ball for long periods often produced little more than reflections of the surrounding room. Some claimed they could see shapes forming within the glass, while others admitted that the only thing they noticed was the reflection of their own faces staring back at them. The exercise sometimes produced quiet laughter among groups of students who found the situation slightly absurd, yet even those who doubted the method often continued watching the crystal just in case something unusual appeared. Another area of divination that Sybill taught involved the interpretation of dreams, which she believed could carry powerful messages about events that had not yet occurred. Students were often asked to keep records of their dreams, writing down the details they remembered after waking and then discussing those details during class. Sybill explained that certain images within dreams might represent emotions, warnings, or hidden possibilities connected to the future, and she encouraged students to think carefully about the meaning behind the symbols they encountered while sleeping. Some students found this idea intriguing because dreams already felt mysterious and difficult to explain, and the suggestion that they might contain glimpses of the future made them even more fascinating. Others struggled to see the connection between ordinary dreams and real predictions, especially when their dreams involved strange combinations of everyday events that seemed unlikely to carry deeper meaning. As with many aspects of divination, the interpretation of dreams depended heavily on imagination and personal belief. Because of these varied reactions, Sybill's classes often contained a mixture of curiosity, confusion, and amusement. The subject itself did not offer the same clear results that students could achieve in other magical lessons, and that difference sometimes made it difficult for them to judge whether they were succeeding or failing. In subjects like charms or transfiguration, students could see obvious evidence when a spell worked correctly or incorrectly, yet divination rarely provided such clear answers. This uncertainty is one of the reasons divination has always been considered an imprecise magical discipline within the wizarding world. Many respected witches and wizards argue that the future cannot be predicted with complete accuracy because the choices people make can always alter the direction of events. A prophecy might suggest one possible outcome, yet those who hear it may change their behavior in ways that lead to a different result. Because of this complexity, even genuine seers often struggle to explain exactly how their visions should be understood. Sybill Trelawney was well aware of these doubts, yet she remained deeply committed to the belief that divination offered valuable insight into forces that could not be measured through ordinary magical study. Her teaching style emphasized the idea that the future was not a fixed path, but a series of possibilities waiting to be interpreted by those willing to listen carefully. She often spoke with dramatic intensity about unseen dangers or hidden opportunities, encouraging students to trust their instincts even when their predictions felt uncertain. Some students left her classroom believing that divination held genuine mystery and potential, while others left convinced that the subject depended too heavily on imagination to be reliable. Yet regardless of their opinions, the experience of sitting within the dimly lit tower room, surrounded by teacups, crystal balls, and drifting incense created a memory that many students carried with them long after the lesson ended. And while laughter and skepticism sometimes filled the classroom, there remained a quiet irony hidden within those lessons, because the teacher, guiding them through this uncertain practice, had already delivered one of the most powerful prophecies in modern magical history without even remembering it. High above the rest of Hogwarts, Sybill Trelawney continued teaching the art of divination as though it were a mystery she was still trying to understand herself. Unaware that the future she encouraged her students to explore had already spoken through her voice once before. The predictions, as the years passed within the high and shadowed room of the North Tower at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, the lessons of Sybill Trelawney slowly developed a reputation that spread through the corridors of the castle and into the conversations of students who compared their experiences after class. Divination was already a subject surrounded by uncertainty, but the personality and teaching style of Sybill Trelawney made the class feel even more mysterious and dramatic than most students expected when they first climbed the long spiral staircase to reach her tower classroom. Over time, stories about her predictions began to travel from student to student, growing larger and more exaggerated as they passed through the lively gossip that filled the halls of the school. One of the most noticeable features of Sybill's lessons was her tendency to speak about the future in ways that emphasized danger and tragedy. She often warned students to be cautious of dark omens that might appear within their tea leaves or crystal balls, and her voice frequently dropped into a serious tone whenever she believed she had noticed a sign connected to death or disaster. During some lessons, she would suddenly become very quiet while studying a student's cup or the pattern of cards spread across a table, and then she would deliver a solemn prediction that suggested the student might soon encounter serious trouble. For many students, these warnings created an unusual mixture of fear and curiosity, because the possibility that a teacher might truly see a dark event approaching was both fascinating and unsettling. Some students listened carefully to every word she spoke, wondering whether they should treat her warnings as real guidance or simply as part of the mysterious atmosphere she enjoyed creating. Others reacted with nervous laughter, unsure whether they should be concerned or amused by the dramatic tone she used when describing possible future events. Sybill often seemed convinced that signs of danger appeared frequently within the symbols she studied, and she did not hesitate to share those impressions with the students sitting around her small circular tables. A cluster of tea leaves might be interpreted as the shape of a black dog, which she might describe as a symbol of looming misfortune. A faint mark inside a crystal ball might cause her to speak about approaching hardship or the shadow of loss that she believed she could sense within the room. These warnings were delivered with such seriousness that students sometimes glanced nervously at one another, wondering whether they were truly hearing a prophecy or simply witnessing their teacher's imagination at work. Because these predictions were spoken so often, however, a strange pattern began to form over time. Many of the dark events Sybill warned about did not actually happen in the way she described. Students who were told to expect tragedy often continued their days without experiencing anything unusual, and the ominous signs she interpreted during class rarely developed into the disasters she predicted. After several years of lessons filled with dramatic warnings that seemed to fade into ordinary days, many students began to question whether her visions should be taken seriously. This skepticism slowly grew into a reputation that followed Sybill throughout the castle. Some students joked quietly that attending her class was more like watching a play than learning a reliable form of magic, because they believed her predictions depended more on theatrical expression than genuine foresight. Stories spread about how she had warned certain students about dangers that never arrived, and these stories often became exaggerated as they traveled from one group of students to another. Teachers within the school were also aware of this reputation, and some of them shared the doubts that students expressed during private conversations. Divination had always been viewed with suspicion by certain members of the Hogwarts staff, particularly by those who preferred magical disciplines that relied on clear evidence rather than interpretation. One of the most well-known critics of the subject was Minerva McGonagall, who openly expressed her belief that divination was an imprecise branch of magic that could easily mislead students who expected clear answers about the future. For Sybill, hearing such doubts likely created a quiet sense of frustration because she believed deeply in the importance of divination and in the possibility that hidden truths about the future could reveal themselves through careful observation. She may have felt that those who mocked the subject simply lacked the patience or intuition required to understand it. Yet, the growing reputation that she was unreliable made it increasingly difficult for her predictions to be taken seriously by many of the students who attended her lessons. Despite this skepticism, there were moments when something she said seemed to carry unexpected accuracy, and these moments created a strange contrast with the many predictions that appeared to lead nowhere. On rare occasions, Sybill would speak about an event or symbol that later appeared to connect with something real, though these moments often passed quietly without attracting the same attention as her more dramatic warnings. One example involved her habit of sensing the presence of unseen forces within the classroom. Moments when she would pause suddenly and speak as though she felt something unusual in the air. Students often interpreted these moments as part of her dramatic teaching style, yet there were times when the strange feelings she described seemed connected to events unfolding elsewhere within the castle. Because divination works in ways that are difficult to measure, it is often impossible to determine whether such moments represent genuine glimpses of the future or simply coincidence. Another example can be found in the way she occasionally interpreted symbols that later appeared meaningful when viewed in hindsight. A shape in tea leaves might resemble a certain object or creature, and while students might laugh at the interpretation during the lesson, later events sometimes caused them to remember those symbols differently. In this way, some of Sybill's predictions existed in a strange space, where they seemed unclear at first, but gained meaning once time had passed. This pattern created an unusual situation in which many of her predictions were dismissed as exaggeration, while a few seemed to prove accurate in quiet and unexpected ways. Because the accurate moments were less dramatic than her warnings of disaster, they often attracted less attention from students who preferred stories that sounded entertaining or humorous. Yet those who looked closely at the history of her lessons might notice that the future occasionally revealed itself through her words, even if those moments were rare. The difficulty of recognizing these accurate predictions also came from the nature of prophecy itself, which rarely presents information in clear and simple language. Visions of the future often appear through symbols and impressions rather than direct explanations, and this makes it easy for people to misunderstand what they are seeing or hearing. When Sybill spoke about certain signs she believed she had noticed, she might have been describing possibilities rather than fixed outcomes, which meant that the meaning of her predictions could shift depending on how events later unfolded. For the students who attended her classes, however, the immediate experience often felt more entertaining than mysterious. They remembered the dramatic warnings about danger, the way Sybill's voice would grow serious when she believed she saw signs of misfortune, and the strange tension that filled the room whenever she announced that someone might soon face a terrible fate. Those moments created stories that students eagerly shared with their friends after leaving the tower, and those stories gradually shaped the reputation that followed Sybill through the halls of Hogwarts. Yet behind the laughter and skepticism, there remained a quiet truth that most students never considered, because the woman they were joking about had already delivered one of the most powerful prophecies in modern magical history. The world beyond the castle walls had already begun to feel the effects of the words she once spoke during a trance she could not even remember. While students questioned the reliability of her predictions about tea leaves and crystal balls, the prophecy she had unknowingly delivered continued to influence the path of events far beyond the classroom. This strange contrast between her public reputation and her hidden importance made Sybill Trelawney one of the most misunderstood figures within Hogwarts. To many students, she appeared to be an overly dramatic teacher who warned constantly about disasters that never arrived. Yet, in rare moments, her connection to the mysterious forces of prophecy seemed to break through the surface of ordinary life. And high above the busy corridors of the castle, within a room filled with drifting incense and softly glowing crystal balls, she continued studying the uncertain language of the future, while the few accurate glimpses she offered remained quietly hidden among the many predictions that others chose not to believe. Colleagues and critics. Life inside the castle of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry was not only shaped by the lessons that teachers gave to their students, but also by the quiet relationships and opinions shared among the staff who lived and worked within its ancient stone walls. The professors who taught at Hogwarts formed a small community that spent many years together, guiding young witches and wizards through their education. And like any group of individuals with strong personalities and different beliefs, they often held varying opinions about each other's methods and abilities. Among this group of respected teachers, Sybill Trelawney remained one of the most unusual and often misunderstood figures. Her subject, divination, already carried a reputation that made many magical scholars uncertain about its reliability, and because of this skepticism, the teachers who specialized in more precise branches of magic often struggled to see the value in the lessons she conducted high in the North Tower. While subjects like transfiguration, charms, and potions followed clear rules that could be practiced and measured, divination depended heavily on interpretation, imagination, and belief. This difference created a quiet divide between Sybill and some of her fellow professors, because many of them preferred forms of magic that produced visible results rather than symbolic predictions. Among the most vocal critics of divination within the Hogwarts staff was Minerva McGonagall, a teacher known for her strict standards, clear thinking, and deep respect for discipline in magical learning. McGonagall believed strongly in subjects that demanded precision and logical understanding, and she had little patience for ideas that could not be demonstrated through reliable magical practice. Because of this perspective, she often expressed doubt about the usefulness of divination as a serious academic subject. During conversations with students or other teachers, she sometimes described divination as an imprecise art that relied too much on guesswork and vague symbolism. From her point of view, teaching young witches and wizards to read patterns in tea leaves or to search for shapes inside crystal balls did not offer the same educational value as teaching them how to control powerful spells or understand complex magical theory. Although she did not openly insult Sybill as a person, her tone whenever the subject of divination arose made it clear that she considered the practice unreliable. Students who heard McGonagall speak about divination often carried those opinions with them into their lessons with Sybill, which added another layer of skepticism to the classroom atmosphere. If a respected professor like McGonagall questioned the legitimacy of the subject, it became easier for students to view Sybill's dramatic predictions as something closer to entertainment than genuine prophecy. The influence of McGonagall's reputation therefore played a subtle role in shaping how many students approached divination lessons. Yet McGonagall was not entirely alone in her doubts, because other members of the Hogwarts staff also found it difficult to understand Sybill's approach to teaching. Some professors simply avoided discussing the subject, choosing instead to focus on their own responsibilities within the school. Others quietly wondered whether the predictions she delivered during lessons were based on genuine insight or simply on her strong belief in the mystical traditions of divination. Despite these criticisms, Sybill remained a member of the Hogwarts faculty, because she had one important supporter whose opinion carried more weight than anyone else within the castle. That supporter was Albus Dumbledore, the headmaster who had personally chosen to bring her to Hogwarts after witnessing the prophecy she delivered during their meeting at the Hogshead Inn. Dumbledore rarely spoke openly about the reasons behind his decision to hire Sybill, and most members of the staff believed that he simply wished to maintain a complete range of magical subjects within the school's curriculum. Yet his support for her position was stronger than many realized, because he knew something about her abilities that almost no one else understood. He had witnessed a genuine prophetic trance, an event so rare that even experienced magical scholars might never encounter one during their entire lives. Because of this knowledge, Dumbledore treated Sybill with quiet patience, even when her behavior seemed overly dramatic, or when her predictions appeared unreliable. He understood that true seers often had little control over when their visions appeared, and he believed that keeping her within the safety of Hogwarts ensured that if another real prophecy emerged, it would not be lost or misunderstood. His support for her was rarely loud or dramatic, but it was steady and consistent. Whenever questions arose about whether divination should remain part of the Hogwarts curriculum, Dumbledore allowed the subject to continue without interference. He trusted that even if many of Sybill's daily predictions seemed exaggerated, the deeper gift she carried might reveal itself again at the right moment. For Sybill, however, the presence of Dumbledore's quiet protection did not always remove the sense of isolation she felt among the other teachers. The staff at Hogwarts shared meals together in the Great Hall and sometimes gathered to discuss school matters, yet Sybill often seemed separate from these conversations. Her personality and teaching style were very different from those of her colleagues, and the skepticism surrounding divination made it difficult for her to feel fully accepted within the group. While other professors spoke about magical theory or the progress of their students, Sybill often preferred discussing symbols, omens, and possible futures that others found difficult to interpret. Her fascination with prophecy created a distance between her and those who focused on more practical forms of magic. Over time, this distance slowly grew into a quiet loneliness that followed her through the castle. Much of her life, therefore, remained centered within the walls of the North Tower, where she felt most comfortable, surrounded by the objects and atmosphere that supported her belief in divination. The soft glow of candles, the scent of incense drifting through the air, and the reflective surfaces of crystal balls formed a world that felt familiar and meaningful to her. Within that space, she could speak freely about visions and symbols, without worrying about the doubtful expressions she sometimes noticed among her fellow teachers. Outside the tower, however, the attitudes of others were not always easy to ignore. When students repeated jokes about her dramatic predictions, those jokes sometimes echoed through the corridors in ways that eventually reached the ears of the teachers themselves. Even if the staff did not openly mock her, Sybill could likely sense the quiet skepticism that surrounded her subject. Yet despite this loneliness, she continued teaching with dedication, because her belief in the value of divination remained strong. She truly believed that the future left traces within the present, waiting for those with the right sensitivity to notice them. Even when others doubted her methods, she remained committed to guiding students through the mysterious process of searching for meaning within symbols and visions. The strange situation surrounding Sybill Trelawney therefore revealed an interesting contrast within the community of Hogwarts teachers. On one hand, she was viewed with doubt by respected colleagues who valued clear evidence and precise magical skill. On the other hand, she was protected by a headmaster who understood that her abilities reached beyond the ordinary patterns of divination she practiced during daily lessons. Between those two realities, she lived a life that was both secure and isolated, supported by the authority of Dumbledore, yet separated from many of her peers by the unusual nature of her subject. And high above the castle, within the quiet chamber of the North Tower, she continued teaching students about the uncertain language of the future, while the staff below carried on with their own lessons, often unaware that the woman they questioned had once spoken words that would shape the destiny of the wizarding world. Harry Potter enters her classroom. The years at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry passed with the steady rhythm of lessons, seasons, and students moving from one class to another as they advanced through their magical education. And during this time, Sybill Trelawney continued teaching divination high in the North Tower, while her reputation among students slowly grew into a mixture of curiosity, amusement, and quiet suspicion. Many students climbed the long spiral staircase to her classroom, expecting something unusual, because stories about the dim lighting, the drifting incense, and the dramatic predictions had already spread through the castle. Yet, even among these strange lessons, one particular group of students would soon create a moment that became part of the lasting memory of her teaching career. Among those students was Harry Potter, the boy whose name had already become famous throughout the wizarding world long before he ever stepped inside the divination classroom. Harry had grown up hearing fragments of the story about how he survived the attack of the dark wizard Lord Voldemort when he was only a baby. Yet, despite that extraordinary past, he still experienced Hogwarts as a student trying to navigate ordinary school life. Like many other students his age, he approached the subject of divination with a mixture of curiosity and doubt, because the class carried a reputation for being unpredictable and difficult to understand. Harry's first journey up the winding staircase to the North Tower was already an unusual experience compared to his other classes. The climb itself seemed long and slightly exhausting, and by the time he and his classmates reached the small door leading into Sybill Trelawney's classroom, they were greeted by the familiar scent of incense drifting through the air and the warm glow of lamps that created a soft, shadowy atmosphere. Inside the room, the students noticed small round tables, delicate teacups, shelves filled with mysterious objects, and several crystal balls that reflected the dim light in strange patterns. When Sybill welcomed the students into the room, she immediately began explaining that divination was not a subject that could be approached with strict logic or impatience, because it depended on instinct, interpretation, and a willingness to open the mind to possibilities that could not always be clearly proven. Her voice carried the same dramatic tone that many students had heard about from older classmates, and she spoke as though the future itself might be listening from somewhere beyond the walls of the tower. The early lessons followed familiar methods that Sybill had practiced for many years, including the reading of tea leaves and the study of symbols that might appear within the cups after the tea had been finished. Harry and his friends attempted to follow the instructions carefully, though many of them struggled to see clear shapes within the scattered patterns of leaves left behind inside the cups. For some students, the exercise felt almost like a guessing game, because they often needed to convince themselves that a random shape might resemble something meaningful. At one point during these lessons, Sybill approached Harry and asked to examine the cup he had been studying. She leaned forward carefully while holding the cup close to the dim light, her large glasses reflecting the glow of the lamps as she studied the shapes formed by the leaves. The room grew quiet as the other students watched her reaction, because they had already learned that Sybill often delivered dramatic predictions after examining these symbols. After a long moment of silent observation, Sybill suddenly became very still and began speaking in a serious voice that seemed much heavier than the ordinary tone of her lessons. She announced that the pattern she saw inside Harry's cup resembled a large black dog, a symbol that she identified as something known in divination as the Grim. According to the traditions she described, the Grim was considered a sign of approaching death, an omen that suggested a person might soon face their final moments. The announcement created an immediate reaction within the classroom. Some students looked shocked and uneasy, while others struggled not to laugh, because the idea of predicting death from a pattern of tea leaves seemed almost unbelievable. Harry himself did not know how seriously he should take the warning, because although the prediction sounded dramatic, he had already experienced many strange rumors and stories about his life before arriving at Hogwarts. Among the students watching this moment unfold was Ron Weasley, whose reaction reflected the confusion shared by many others in the room. Some students whispered to each other quietly, Unsure whether Sybill's words were meant to be taken literally or simply as part of her usual dramatic teaching style. Laughter began to ripple softly through the classroom, though it was not entirely confident laughter, because even those who doubted the prediction could not completely ignore the unsettling tone with which it had been delivered. This moment marked the beginning of a strange relationship between Harry and Sybill Trelawney that would continue throughout his time studying divination. For Sybill, Harry represented something more than an ordinary student, even though she did not consciously remember the prophecy she had once spoken that directly connected his life to the fate of Voldemort. Somewhere within her instincts, there seemed to be a sense that Harry carried unusual significance, which may have influenced the way she reacted whenever she examined signs connected to him. Harry, on the other hand, found it difficult to decide whether he should take Sybill's warnings seriously. On one hand, he had already experienced enough strange events in his life to understand that unusual things could happen in the magical world. On the other hand, the constant dramatic tone of her predictions made it difficult for him to treat them as reliable information about the future. This mixture of doubt and curiosity shaped the atmosphere of many divination lessons involving Harry and his classmates. Students often laughed quietly at the exaggerated tone of Sybill's warnings, yet beneath that laughter, there was sometimes a subtle sense of unease that lingered in the room. Even those who doubted her predictions occasionally found themselves remembering her words later, especially when unusual events occurred within the castle. The grim prediction itself eventually became a story that students repeated throughout Hogwarts, sometimes exaggerating the details in ways that made the moment sound even more dramatic than it had originally been. Some students joked that Harry had been doomed from the moment he stepped into the divination classroom, while others treated the story as another example of Sybill's habit of seeing danger everywhere. Yet there remained a strange irony hidden within that moment, because although many of her classroom predictions appeared exaggerated or incorrect, the larger story of Harry Potter's life truly was connected to forces far more dangerous than most students could imagine. The prophecy spoken years earlier during Sybill's trance had already linked his future to the dark wizard Voldemort in ways that would eventually shape the fate of the wizarding world. Inside the divination classroom, however, that deeper truth remained invisible. Students continued studying tea leaves, staring into crystal balls, and occasionally laughing at the dramatic warnings delivered by their teacher. The grim prediction became just one more story among many strange moments that occurred within the softly lit tower room. And as Harry and his classmates descended the long staircase after each lesson, the laughter that echoed through the corridor often carried a faint trace of uncertainty, because even though they joked about the predictions, none of them could completely ignore the mysterious possibility that somewhere within those symbols and warnings, there might be a glimpse of something real waiting to unfold. The second prophecy, the winter season at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, often brought a quiet change to the atmosphere within the castle, because the days grew shorter, the windows filled with pale light from the snowy grounds outside, and many students left the school for the Christmas holidays to spend time with their families. For those who remained behind during the break, the castle felt calmer and more spacious than usual, with long corridors that seemed almost silent compared to the lively noise that filled them during the regular term. It was during one of these quieter moments, when only a small number of students were still attending lessons, that something unusual happened inside the North Tower classroom of Sybill Trelawney. The lesson had begun in a way that felt familiar to the students who had already spent time studying divination with her. The room was warm with the glow of lamps and the scent of incense drifting slowly through the air, and small round tables were arranged around the room with crystal balls placed carefully on their stands. Sybill spoke in her usual calm and mysterious tone as she guided the remaining students through an exercise that involved staring into the glass spheres while attempting to quiet their thoughts and allow possible visions to appear. For most students, this practice felt difficult and uncertain, because the smooth surface of the crystal ball rarely revealed anything more than reflections of the room and the faces of those staring into it. Among the students still present during that winter lesson was Harry Potter, who had become somewhat accustomed to the unusual environment of the divination classroom, even though he still found many of the exercises difficult to understand. Like the others, he leaned forward slightly while looking into the crystal ball placed on the table in front of him, trying to follow Sybill's instructions about clearing the mind and waiting for faint shapes to appear within the glass. At first, the lesson continued in a quiet and ordinary way, with Sybill walking slowly between the tables while observing the students and offering occasional comments about what they might be seeing. Her voice carried the same dramatic tone that students had come to expect, and the room remained calm except for the soft crackling of the lamps and the distant sounds of winter wind moving across the castle outside. Then, without warning, something changed. As Sybill approached the table where Harry sat, she suddenly stopped speaking in the middle of a sentence and seemed to lose her focus entirely. Her posture shifted in a way that immediately caught the attention of the students nearby, because the movement did not resemble her usual theatrical gestures during lessons. Instead, she appeared to grow rigid and strangely distant, as though her thoughts had suddenly moved somewhere far beyond the walls of the classroom. Her voice, when she began speaking again, sounded different from the dramatic tone students had grown used to hearing. It became lower and rougher, and the words that followed carried a strange rhythm that felt unlike ordinary conversation. The students watching her sensed immediately that something unusual was happening, though few of them could explain why the atmosphere in the room suddenly felt heavy and tense. In this altered state, Sybill began delivering words that sounded less like a lesson and more like a message being spoken through her rather than by her. The prophecy she spoke described the return of a servant who had long remained hidden, but who would soon seek out the master he had once served. According to the words she spoke, this servant would help restore the power of a dark wizard who had been waiting for the right moment to rise again. Although the prophecy did not mention the name directly, the meaning behind the message pointed clearly toward the dark wizard who had once terrorized the wizarding world, Lord Voldemort. The prophecy suggested that one of his followers, someone who had remained in hiding for years, would soon return to him and help bring about the restoration of his power. The students listening to this strange speech did not fully understand the importance of what they were hearing, yet the tone of Sybill's voice created a feeling of unease that spread through the room. The words seemed heavier than the usual predictions she offered during lessons, and the way she delivered them lacked the theatrical style that normally caused students to smile or exchange amused glances. Instead, there was a strange seriousness in the moment, a feeling that the classroom had suddenly become the center of something far more significant than a routine exercise in divination. The prophecy continued only briefly before Sybill's body relaxed and her voice returned to its normal tone. When the trance ended, she looked around the room with a slightly confused expression, appearing unaware that anything unusual had just taken place. The students were left staring at one another, uncertain whether they had truly witnessed a genuine prophetic trance or simply another dramatic performance from their teacher. Because Sybill had delivered many exaggerated warnings during earlier lessons, some of them quietly assumed that the moment might have been part of her usual style. Yet there was something about the change in her voice and posture that made the experience feel different from the predictions they had heard before. For Harry, the moment passed quickly and was soon overshadowed by the many other events that shaped his life during his time at Hogwarts. At the time, he did not fully realize that the prophecy he had just heard would later connect directly to the return of the dark wizard who had once tried to destroy him as a child. The deeper meaning behind Sybill's words became clearer only when viewed from a wider perspective. The prophecy spoke about a servant who would return to Voldemort and help restore his strength, and this description matched the actions of a follower who had remained hidden for many years, while waiting for the right opportunity to reveal himself again. That servant was Peter Pettigrew, a man who had secretly betrayed his friends and spent years living in disguise while Voldemort existed only as a weakened spirit. When Pettigrew eventually escaped from hiding and returned to his master, he played a crucial role in helping Voldemort regain the physical form and power he had lost after the failed attack on Harry's family. The prophecy spoken by Sybill had therefore described the beginning of that process long before it became visible to the rest of the wizarding world. Like the earlier prophecy she delivered during her interview with Dumbledore years before, this moment of true prophetic vision occurred without her conscious awareness. Once the trance ended, she had no memory of the words she had spoken, and she continued the lesson as though nothing unusual had happened. For the students present in the classroom, the moment remained confusing and uncertain, because they could not easily distinguish between her usual dramatic predictions and the rare occasions when the genuine power of the sight revealed itself. Yet history would later show that this brief moment during a quiet winter lesson carried enormous importance. The prophecy described a chain of events that would lead directly to the resurrection of Voldemort, an event that would once again plunge the wizarding world into fear and conflict. High above the snowy grounds of Hogwarts, inside a softly lit classroom filled with crystal balls and drifting incense, Sybill Trelawney had once again spoken words that reached far beyond the walls of the castle. And just as before, the future had passed through her voice while she remained unaware that she had become the messenger of a prophecy that would soon reshape the fate of the wizarding world. The prophecy fulfilled. Time moved forward within the ancient halls of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, with the quiet rhythm of lessons, changing seasons, and students growing older as they passed from one year of study to the next. Yet, beyond the castle walls, the wider wizarding world was slowly beginning to shift in ways that would eventually confirm the strange prophecy spoken months earlier, during that winter divination lesson. Inside the softly lit classroom in the North Tower, Sybill Trelawney continued teaching her students how to read patterns in tea leaves and how to search for faint shapes within crystal balls, unaware that the words she had spoken during a sudden trance had already begun moving toward reality. The prophecy had described a servant who had long remained hidden, but who would eventually return to the dark wizard, Lord Voldemort, and help restore the strength he had lost after his fall many years earlier. At the time, the students who heard those words could not understand their meaning, and even Sybill herself had no memory of speaking them once the trance ended. Yet far from the quiet tower classroom where the prophecy had been delivered, a man who perfectly matched that description was already living in secret, waiting for the moment when he could return to the master he had once served. That man was Peter Pettigrew, a wizard whose story was filled with betrayal, fear, and long years of hiding in order to escape the consequences of his actions. Many people in the wizarding world believed Pettigrew had died during the violent days of the First Wizarding War, and his supposed death had been accepted as part of the tragic history surrounding the rise and fall of Voldemort's first attempt at power. Yet the truth was far more complicated, because Pettigrew had secretly survived and chosen to live in disguise, hiding himself from both the magical authorities and from the enemies he feared might discover his true identity. For years he remained hidden, carefully avoiding attention while waiting for any sign that Voldemort might return. During that time, the Dark Wizard existed only as a weakened spirit, unable to regain his former power, but still searching for ways to survive and eventually rise again. Pettigrew's loyalty to Voldemort was driven less by admiration and more by fear, because he believed that serving the Dark Wizard offered him protection from those who might punish him for his past betrayal. Eventually, the moment described in Sybill's prophecy arrived, though most people did not realize its significance when it first occurred. During a series of events that unfolded both within Hogwarts and beyond its grounds, Pettigrew was finally forced to abandon the disguise he had used for many years. Once his secret was exposed, he chose to escape rather than face capture, fleeing into the night and disappearing from the reach of those who might have brought him to justice. His escape created immediate concern among those who understood the danger he represented. Pettigrew had once been a loyal follower of Voldemort, and if he remained free, there was always the possibility that he would attempt to find his former master again. While many people hoped that Voldemort was too weak to regain any real power, others feared that even a small group of loyal followers could help him begin rebuilding his strength. Pettigrew's actions soon confirmed those fears, because after escaping, he began searching for the remnants of the dark wizard he had served. The process of locating Voldemort was not simple, because the once powerful figure now existed in a fragile state, hidden far from the places where he had once ruled through fear. Yet Pettigrew remained determined, driven by the belief that helping Voldemort return to power would secure his own safety. Slowly and quietly, the dark wizard's influence began to grow again, though the early signs were so subtle that many members of the wizarding world did not immediately recognize them as part of a larger pattern. Strange rumors spread about dark magic being used in remote places, and whispers circulated about sightings of unusual creatures and mysterious figures traveling through hidden forests. While these reports seemed scattered and uncertain, those who paid close attention began to notice that something dangerous might be forming once more. Among the people who understood the significance of these signs was Albus Dumbledore, whose long experience with the rise of Voldemort allowed him to recognize patterns that others might overlook. Dumbledore was already aware of the prophecy that Sybill Trelawney had delivered during her interview at the Hog's Head many years earlier, and he also remembered the second prophecy she spoke during that winter lesson in the North Tower. When he learned about Pettigrew's escape and began hearing reports that suggested Voldemort's followers might be gathering again, the meaning behind Sybill's second prophecy suddenly became clear. The servant who had remained hidden had indeed returned to his master, and the process of restoring Voldemort's strength had already begun. For Dumbledore, this realization carried both urgency and quiet confirmation of the strange power hidden within Sybill Trelawney's gift. Although many people within Hogwarts doubted the reliability of divination and often treated Sybill's dramatic predictions with amusement, Dumbledore understood that the rare moments when true prophecy emerged from her voice were far more significant than anyone else realized. Yet even as he recognized the importance of the prophecy being fulfilled, Sybill herself remained completely unaware that the words she had spoken had described events now unfolding in the wider wizarding world. She continued her lessons within the North Tower exactly as she had before, guiding students through the uncertain process of reading tea leaves and searching for shapes inside crystal balls. Students still laughed occasionally at the dramatic tone of her warnings, and some continued believing that many of her predictions were exaggerated or unreliable. None of them realized that the teacher they sometimes joked about had once again spoken a prophecy that accurately described events shaping the future of their world. The fulfillment of that prophecy therefore revealed an unusual truth about Sybill Trelawney's role within the story of the wizarding world. While she appeared to many as an eccentric professor surrounded by incense and mysterious symbols, the rare moments when genuine visions passed through her voice carried extraordinary importance. Those moments occurred without her control and without her memory, leaving her unaware that she had become a messenger for forces that shaped history itself. As Pettigrew worked in secret to restore Voldemort's strength, and as signs of the Dark Wizard's return slowly began spreading through whispers and rumors, the prophecy spoken during that quiet winter lesson moved steadily toward its final outcome. And high above the castle, inside a classroom filled with dim light and drifting incense, Sybill Trelawney continued teaching the uncertain language of the future, unaware that the future had once again proven that her voice carried truths far greater than the predictions most people believed. The Ministry takes control. The years following the return of danger to the wizarding world were filled with tension and uncertainty, and these feelings slowly found their way into the halls of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry as well. Although Hogwarts had always been considered a place of learning and safety, it could never remain completely untouched by the political struggles that shaped the magical government outside its walls. The organization responsible for governing the wizarding community, known as the Ministry of Magic, had begun to grow deeply concerned about the influence and authority of Albus Dumbledore. Many officials within the ministry believed that Dumbledore held too much power, and that his warnings about the return of Lord Voldemort were either exaggerated or deliberately used to challenge the authority of the government. Because of these suspicions, the ministry decided to increase its presence at Hogwarts in ways that had rarely happened before. Officials argued that the school required closer supervision in order to ensure that students were being taught according to ministry standards rather than the personal beliefs of the headmaster. This decision created an atmosphere of unease among both the teachers and the students, because the idea of government interference within Hogwarts felt unfamiliar and unsettling. The person chosen to represent the ministry at Hogwarts was a witch whose appearance and behavior created an impression that was difficult for many people to forget. Her name was Dolores Umbridge, and she arrived at the castle carrying the full authority of the ministry behind her position. At first glance, she presented herself with an overly polite smile and a gentle voice that seemed almost sweet. Yet beneath that carefully controlled manner, there existed a firm determination to enforce the will of the government in every part of the school. Umbridge's arrival marked the beginning of a new period in the life of Hogwarts, because she was not simply another teacher joining the staff, but an official observer whose purpose was to examine how the school was being run. She quickly began attending lessons, watching the teachers carefully, and making detailed notes about their methods. Each classroom became a place where she quietly judged whether the teaching matched the standards set by the ministry. For many professors, this experience felt uncomfortable, because teaching had always involved a degree of personal style and interpretation. Yet Umbridge approached her observations as though she was searching for mistakes or weaknesses that could justify greater control from the government. The presence of a ministry official sitting quietly at the back of the room while writing notes created tension even for the most confident teachers. When it came time for Umbridge to observe the lessons of Sybill Trelawney, the situation became even more complicated, because divination had long been considered one of the least respected subjects in magical education. Many people within the ministry shared the same skepticism that some Hogwarts teachers had expressed over the years, believing that predicting the future through symbols and visions lacked the clear evidence required for serious study. The divination classroom in the North Tower already felt unusual compared to the rest of the castle, with its dim lighting, drifting incense, and tables covered with teacups and crystal balls. When Umbridge entered the room to observe one of Sybill's lessons, the contrast between the two women was immediately noticeable. Sybill wore her familiar layers of shawls and spoke in her dramatic and mystical tone, while Umbridge sat stiffly in her chair with a sweet but clearly critical expression as she watched everything unfold. During the lessons, Sybill attempted to guide her students through one of the exercises she had practiced for many years, encouraging them to study the patterns left by tea leaves and search for symbols that might hint at events waiting in the future. The students followed the instructions as best they could, though the presence of Umbridge observing the class made the atmosphere feel tense rather than mysterious. Umbridge asked several questions while writing notes on a small clipboard she carried with her, and although her voice remained polite, the meaning behind her questions suggested that she was deeply doubtful about the subject she was witnessing. She asked how often Sybill's predictions proved accurate and whether there were clear records demonstrating the reliability of her methods. These questions were difficult for Sybill to answer in a way that satisfied the official observer, because divination rarely produced the kind of measurable results that Umbridge seemed to expect. As the lesson continued, Umbridge's skepticism became more obvious. She watched closely whenever Sybill interpreted a symbol or offered a prediction, and she occasionally raised her eyebrows in a way that suggested she was not impressed by what she saw. For students already familiar with the doubts surrounding divination, the situation felt almost embarrassing, because their teacher's dramatic explanations now seemed to be judged by someone who clearly believed the entire subject was questionable. The tension within the room grew stronger when Umbridge began asking Sybill directly about her qualifications and the evidence supporting her claim to possess the sight. Sybill attempted to defend her work by explaining that true prophecy often appeared unpredictably, and that the ability to interpret symbols required sensitivity rather than rigid proof. Yet these explanations did not seem to satisfy Umbridge, whose approach to authority depended on clear rules and official approval. Outside the classroom, the ministry's influence over Hogwarts continued expanding, and many teachers realized that Umbridge's presence represented a larger effort to weaken Dumbledore's control over the school. By examining each professor and questioning their methods, the ministry could gradually replace teachers they considered unsuitable and bring the school more directly under government authority. For Sybill Trelawney, this situation created particular vulnerability because her subject already faced skepticism from many corners of the wizarding world. While teachers of subjects like transfiguration or charms could demonstrate their abilities through powerful spells, divination relied on subtle impressions and interpretations that were easy for critics to dismiss. Umbridge, therefore, viewed Sybill as one of the weaker members of the Hogwarts faculty, someone whose position might be easier to challenge than those of more traditionally respected professors. Her questions during the classroom observation hinted at this belief, and it became clear that she was carefully evaluating whether divination deserved a place within the school at all. As the days passed, and Umbridge continued observing different lessons throughout the castle, the pressure on Sybill grew heavier. She began to sense that the ministry official did not trust her abilities and might eventually use that doubt as a reason to remove her from her position. For someone who had spent many years building a life within the North Tower of Hogwarts, the possibility of losing that place created deep anxiety. Yet even as Umbridge watched her closely and questioned the value of her subject, there remained one important truth that the ministry official did not fully understand. Although Sybill's daily predictions often appeared exaggerated or uncertain, she had already spoken prophecies that had shaped the history of the wizarding world. Those moments had occurred without warning and without her conscious control, which meant that even she did not always recognize the significance of her own abilities. The arrival of Dolores Umbridge therefore created a tense new chapter in the life of Hogwarts, one where the authority of the ministry challenged the traditions of the school and placed teachers under constant scrutiny. For Sybill Trelawney, the experience felt especially threatening because the doubts surrounding divination now stood under the harsh light of government judgment. And within the dimly lit tower, where she had spent so many years teaching the uncertain art of prophecy, she could sense that the future might soon bring a change she had never predicted. The evaluation. The presence of the ministry inside Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry had already begun to change the atmosphere within the castle, and the teachers who had spent many years guiding students through their subjects now found themselves working under a quiet but constant sense of observation. The person responsible for this watchful scrutiny was Dolores Umbridge, who had arrived at the school with the authority of the Ministry of Magic and the clear intention of examining every detail of how Hogwarts was being run. Her presence created tension in the corridors and staff rooms of the castle, because the teachers understood that her reports could influence decisions far beyond the walls of the school. Among the professors whose lessons she intended to evaluate was Sybill Trelawney, whose unusual subject and dramatic teaching style had long attracted both curiosity and skepticism within the wizarding world. Divination had never been a discipline that produced clear and measurable results, and many officials within the ministry already believed that its place within magical education was questionable. For Umbridge, whose personality combined strict authority with a deep belief in bureaucratic control, the opportunity to evaluate the divination class offered a chance to demonstrate that the subject did not meet the standards she believed the school should follow. The day of the evaluation began with an unusual quietness in the North Tower classroom, because word had spread among the students that a ministry official would be observing the lesson. The climb up the long spiral staircase already made divination feel different from other subjects, yet on this particular morning, the tension was stronger than usual. When the students entered the softly lit room, they noticed that Umbridge was already present, seated near the edge of the classroom with a small clipboard resting neatly in her hands. The contrast between the two women in the room was immediately clear. Sybill Trelawney stood surrounded by her familiar atmosphere of incense, shawls, and crystal balls that reflected the warm light of the lamps, while Umbridge sat upright in her chair, wearing a carefully arranged smile that seemed polite but distant. Her eyes moved slowly across the classroom as though she were examining every object and every person present, recording details that might later appear in an official report. The lesson began with Sybill explaining that the students would practice gazing into crystal balls, one of the traditional methods used by seers attempting to glimpse fragments of the future. She spoke with her usual dramatic tone, reminding the class that divination required patience and sensitivity rather than strict logic, and that those who rushed to judge the practice might overlook the subtle messages hidden within the symbols they observed. Each student moved toward the small tables where crystal balls rested upon soft cushions, and they leaned forward slightly while trying to follow Sybill's instructions about clearing the mind and focusing on the smooth glass surface before them. For many of the students, this exercise was already familiar, yet the presence of Umbridge sitting quietly nearby made the process feel uncomfortable and awkward. Instead of concentrating on the crystal balls, several students found themselves glancing nervously toward the ministry official, who continued writing notes as the lesson progressed. As the students stared into the glass spheres, they struggled to describe what they saw. Some claimed to notice faint shapes or shadows forming within the reflections, while others admitted that they could see nothing beyond the blurred image of the room around them. These responses were not unusual for a divination lesson, because crystal ball gazing rarely produced clear visions for beginners. Yet under the careful watch of Umbridge, the exercise seemed less mysterious and more embarrassing. Sybill attempted to guide the students by offering suggestions about what the shapes might represent. She moved from table to table while speaking about possible symbols connected to travel, danger, or unexpected change. Her voice carried the same theatrical intensity that had filled the North Tower for many years, yet the presence of Umbridge observing every word made the performance feel more fragile than before. At one point, Umbridge raised her hand politely and interrupted the lesson with a question that seemed innocent, but carried a sharp edge beneath its gentle tone. She asked Sybill how often the predictions made during these exercises proved accurate when compared with real events that occurred later. The question created an uncomfortable silence among the students, because they understood that divination rarely offered the kind of precise evidence that Umbridge seemed to expect. Sybill attempted to answer by explaining that prophecy did not follow the same rules as other forms of magic, and that the meaning of visions often became clear only after time had passed. She described how symbols might represent possibilities rather than fixed outcomes, and how the interpretation of those symbols required intuition and experience rather than simple measurement. Umbridge listened carefully while continuing to write notes on her clipboard, yet her expression suggested that the explanation did not satisfy her expectations. When Sybill finished speaking, Umbridge asked another question about whether the subject could demonstrate consistent results that justified its place within the school curriculum. The tone of her voice remained polite, but the implication behind her words made it clear that she doubted the legitimacy of what she was observing. The students sitting around the tables could sense the tension growing within the room. Some lowered their eyes toward the crystal balls again, pretending to search for visions while quietly hoping the lesson would end soon. Others exchanged uncertain glances, unsure whether they should continue participating or simply remain silent while the two adults spoke. After observing the class for a longer period, Umbridge finally closed her notebook and stood up from her chair. Her smile returned, though it felt colder than before, and she thanked Sybill for allowing her to observe the lesson. Yet the brief politeness of her words did not hide the judgment that had already formed in her mind. Within a short time, the results of the evaluation became clear. Using the authority granted to her by the Ministry of Magic, Umbridge announced that she had decided to remove Sybill Trelawney from her position as the divination professor at Hogwarts. The official explanation focused on the belief that her subject did not meet the standards required for proper magical education, and that her methods lacked the reliability expected from a teacher responsible for guiding students. The decision spread quickly through the castle, and many students were surprised to hear that the familiar teacher from the North Tower would no longer be conducting lessons. Some reacted with quiet amusement, believing that divination had always been one of the strangest subjects offered at Hogwarts. Others felt uneasy about the situation, because they sensed that the removal of a teacher by ministry order represented a serious change in how the school was being controlled. For Sybill Trelawney, the announcement felt devastating. The North Tower had become her home over many years, a place where she could surround herself with the objects and atmosphere that supported her belief in divination. Being forced to leave that space meant losing not only her position, but also the environment that had defined her life within the castle. Yet behind the official decision made by Dolores Umbridge, there remained a deeper irony that few people in the school fully understood. Although the ministry official dismissed Sybill as an unreliable teacher whose subject lacked clear evidence, the quiet truth was that the divination professor had already spoken prophecies that shaped the destiny of the wizarding world. Those rare moments of genuine sight had appeared without warning and without her control, which meant that even she did not realize the true importance of the gift she carried. The evaluation in the North Tower therefore marked a turning point, not only in Sybill Trelawney's life, but also in the growing conflict between the authority of the ministry and the traditions of Hogwarts. And while the crystal balls and teacups remained resting quietly upon the tables of the dimly lit classroom, the future of the teacher who had guided those lessons was suddenly uncertain in a way she had never predicted. Public dismissal. The decision made by Dolores Umbridge did not remain hidden within the quiet offices of the castle for very long, because the new authority she carried from the Ministry of Magic was designed to be visible and unquestioned, and she believed strongly that demonstrating her control over Hogwarts' School of Witchcraft and Wizardry required actions that everyone in the castle could witness. The removal of a teacher was therefore not handled quietly or privately, but instead unfolded in a way that soon became one of the most uncomfortable and painful scenes many students had ever witnessed within the normally secure walls of the school. For many years, Sybill Trelawney had lived almost entirely within the North Tower, teaching divination and surrounding herself with the mysterious objects that defined her subject. Her classroom had been filled with crystal balls, teacups, and drifting incense. And while students sometimes laughed at her dramatic warnings or exaggerated predictions, the tower had nevertheless become a place that belonged to her completely. It was not only her workplace, but also the center of her life within the castle. When the official order arrived, declaring that she was no longer permitted to continue her duties as the divination professor, the reality of that decision reached her suddenly and without any comfort or preparation. The moment did not occur in a quiet office with a respectful conversation about her future. Instead, it unfolded in a place where many students and teachers could see what was happening. Word spread quickly through the castle that Umbridge had come to enforce the decision personally, and students began gathering in the courtyard outside the castle walls, where the confrontation eventually took place. The courtyard had always been a place where students passed between classes or paused to talk with their friends. Yet, on that particular day, the atmosphere felt tense and uncertain as groups of students gathered together while whispering about what they had heard. Sybill Trelawney appeared in the courtyard looking shocked and unprepared, because the news of her dismissal had reached her with such sudden force that she had not yet fully understood what it meant. Her usual layers of shawls hung loosely around her shoulders, and her large glasses reflected the daylight as she looked around at the growing crowd of students who had come to witness the scene. Umbridge stood nearby with the cold authority of someone who believed she was carrying out an official duty rather than participating in a deeply personal moment for another human being. Her expression remained controlled and almost cheerful, which made the situation feel even more uncomfortable for those watching. In her hands, she carried the documents that represented the decision of the ministry, and she spoke about the dismissal with a tone that sounded formal and final. The announcement echoed across the courtyard, confirming that Sybill Trelawney had been removed from her position and that she was expected to leave the castle grounds immediately. The words felt harsh and direct, and the presence of so many students watching made the moment even more painful. What might have been handled quietly under different circumstances had instead become a public event that exposed Sybill's vulnerability to everyone around her. At first, Sybill seemed unable to respond, as though the meaning of the announcement had not yet fully reached her thoughts. She stood still while holding her shawls tightly around herself, her expression slowly shifting from confusion to fear as she realized that the place she had called home for so many years was being taken away from her. Then the emotional weight of the moment broke through her composure. Her voice rose in a distressed tone that many students had never heard before, and she began pleading desperately to remain at the castle. The dramatic style that usually filled her divination lessons was replaced by genuine fear and sorrow as she tried to explain that she had nowhere else to go. Hogwarts had been her home for many years, and leaving it meant losing not only her job, but also the only life she had known for a very long time. The sight of her standing in the courtyard, while surrounded by curious students, created a painful contrast between the mysterious professor many had known in the North Tower and the frightened woman now facing the loss of everything familiar. Some students shifted uncomfortably as they watched, unsure whether they should remain or quietly leave the scene. Others stood silently while realizing that what they were witnessing was not simply the removal of a teacher, but the collapse of someone's entire sense of purpose. For Sybill, the humiliation of that moment must have felt overwhelming. She had spent years building her identity around the role of divination professor, teaching students about symbols and visions, while believing that the mysterious art she practiced held real meaning. Now that identity was being stripped away in front of an audience that included many of the same students who had once listened to her predictions with amusement or doubt. Tears began appearing behind her large glasses as the reality of her situation became impossible to ignore. She spoke about how she had dedicated her life to divination and how she had believed Hogwarts would always be her home. Yet the official authority standing before her did not show sympathy for those words, because Umbridge remained focused on carrying out the order given by the ministry. The courtyard grew quieter as more students recognized how deeply painful the scene had become. What had begun as curiosity about a teacher being dismissed had transformed into something far more uncomfortable, because watching someone lose their purpose so publicly forced everyone present to confront the human cost of the decision. Some students, who had once laughed at Sybill's dramatic predictions, now looked away from the scene, feeling uneasy about witnessing the breakdown of a person they had never truly understood. Others remained frozen in place, unsure how to react, while the emotional weight of the moment filled the open space of the courtyard. For Sybill Trelawney, this was undoubtedly one of the most painful moments of her life, because the place that had defined her existence was being taken from her without dignity or compassion. The North Tower classroom, where she had spent years teaching about the future, was no longer hers, and the students who had once filled that room with curiosity and laughter were now watching as she struggled to accept the loss of everything familiar. Yet, within that painful scene, there remained a quiet irony that few people present could fully understand. The woman being dismissed as an unreliable teacher had once spoken prophecies that shaped the fate of the wizarding world. Those rare moments of true sight had passed through her voice without warning and without her memory, leaving her unaware that she carried a gift far more powerful than most people realized. In the courtyard of Hogwarts, however, that hidden truth offered no comfort. What remained visible to everyone watching was simply a lonely woman whose life had been built around a role that was now being taken away. And as the cold authority of the ministry stood firm against her pleas, the humiliation and sorrow of that moment became a memory that many students would never forget. Dumbledore's quiet mercy. The painful scene unfolding in the courtyard of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry seemed at first as though it would end with the complete removal of a teacher who had spent many years living within the castle walls. Students stood watching with uncertain expressions as Sybill Trelawney struggled to accept the sudden loss of the position that had defined her life for so long, while the official authority of Dolores Umbridge remained firm and unyielding. The documents in Umbridge's hands carried the power of the Ministry of Magic, and according to those orders, Sybill was no longer permitted to remain at the school where she had taught divination for many years. The courtyard had grown quiet, except for Sybill's distressed voice and the calm but cold tone of Umbridge explaining that the decision was final. Students gathered in small groups near the edges of the open space, whispering to one another while watching the scene unfold. Some looked uncomfortable witnessing such a personal moment in public, while others simply stared in silence, unsure whether anyone could challenge the authority that Umbridge represented. Yet within Hogwarts, there remained one figure whose influence was greater than that of any ministry official when it came to decisions about the life of the school. That figure was Albus Dumbledore, the headmaster who had guided the castle for many years and whose reputation as a wise and powerful wizard was known far beyond the grounds of Hogwarts. Dumbledore's arrival in the courtyard was quiet but immediately noticeable. As he stepped forward through the crowd of students and teachers who had gathered to witness the dismissal, the tension in the air shifted slightly, because everyone present understood that the headmaster's voice carried a different kind of authority than the orders issued by the ministry. His expression remained calm, yet there was a seriousness in his eyes that suggested he had been aware of the situation and had chosen the exact moment when his presence would matter most. Sybill, still trembling with emotion, looked toward him with a mixture of relief and desperation. For years he had been the one person within the school who treated her subject with patience rather than ridicule, even when many others doubted the reliability of divination. Now that she faced the possibility of being forced out of the castle entirely, his presence seemed like the only remaining hope that her life within Hogwarts might not end that day. Umbridge turned toward Dumbledore as he approached, and although she attempted to maintain her confident smile, there was a faint hint of irritation behind her expression. She had expected the dismissal to proceed according to the orders she carried from the ministry, and the sudden appearance of the headmaster created a complication she could not easily ignore. Dumbledore listened carefully, while Umbridge explained that the ministry had decided Sybill Trelawney should no longer teach divination and that she was therefore required to leave the school grounds immediately. The explanation was delivered with the same calm formality Umbridge had used before, yet Dumbledore did not respond with anger or confrontation. Instead, he allowed her to finish speaking, while the courtyard remained silent around them. When he finally replied, his voice carried the gentle tone that many students recognized from his speeches in the Great Hall. Yet the meaning behind his words made it clear that the situation was not as simple as Umbridge believed. He calmly acknowledged that the ministry possessed the authority to remove Sybill from her teaching position, and he did not attempt to argue against that decision directly. However, he pointed out an important detail that Umbridge had either overlooked or chosen not to consider. Although the ministry could dismiss a teacher, the authority over who was allowed to live within Hogwarts remained with the headmaster. In other words, while Sybill Trelawney could no longer hold the title of divination professor, there was nothing in the ministry's order that required her to leave the castle entirely. The decision about whether she could remain as a resident within the school still belonged to Dumbledore himself. This quiet clarification changed the entire situation within a single moment. Umbridge realized that the authority she believed to be absolute did not fully extend into every corner of Hogwarts life. The headmaster's power over the internal arrangements of the castle allowed him to offer Sybill something that the ministry's decision had not taken into account. He calmly announced that, although she would no longer teach divination, she was welcome to remain at Hogwarts as a resident of the castle. The words brought immediate relief to Sybill, who had been standing in the courtyard feeling as though her entire world had been taken away from her. The possibility of remaining within the castle meant that she would not be forced into the outside world where she had no clear place to go. Hogwarts had been her home for many years, and even without her position as a teacher, it still offered safety and familiarity. For Dumbledore, the decision carried deeper meaning than simple kindness. He understood something about Sybill that most people in the courtyard did not know. Many years earlier, he had witnessed her deliver a genuine prophecy during their meeting at the Hog's Head, and he also knew that her rare moments of true sight could reveal information that might become important in the future. Keeping her within the protection of Hogwarts ensured that those rare moments would not be lost or exploited by dangerous forces outside the school. The outside world had grown increasingly uncertain as the influence of Lord Voldemort began rising again, and Dumbledore understood that individuals connected to prophecy could become targets for those seeking power. Allowing Sybill to leave the castle would place her in a position where she might be vulnerable to people who wished to use her gift for their own purposes. Within Hogwarts, however, she would remain under the protection of powerful magical defenses and the watchful presence of teachers who were capable of defending the school if necessary. The castle, therefore, became more than a home for her. It became a shield against a world that might not treat her with the same patience Dumbledore had shown. The crowd in the courtyard slowly began to disperse once it became clear that Sybill would not be forced to leave after all. Students who had been watching with uneasy curiosity returned to their conversations, though many of them carried the memory of the scene with them. They had witnessed both the cruelty of a public dismissal and the quiet compassion of a headmaster who refused to abandon someone who had dedicated years of her life to the school. For Sybill, the emotional weight of the moment did not disappear immediately. Her distress had been real and deeply painful, and the sudden reversal of her fate left her exhausted and shaken. Yet as the realization settled in that she could remain within the castle, a sense of fragile relief slowly replaced the panic she had felt only moments earlier. Dumbledore's intervention had not restored her position as a teacher, but it had given her something just as important: a place where she could continue living without fear of being cast into a world that had never truly welcomed her unusual gifts. In the quiet aftermath of the courtyard confrontation, Sybill Trelawney returned toward the castle with uncertain steps, still surrounded by the same shawls and nervous gestures that students had known for years. The North Tower classroom, where she had taught, would no longer belong to her in the same way, yet the ancient walls of Hogwarts would continue offering her shelter. And as the castle resumed its ordinary rhythm of lessons and conversations, the quiet act of mercy shown by Albus Dumbledore remained one of the most powerful moments of compassion within a time when authority and politics threatened to replace kindness with control. The Second Wizarding War. As the years continued to pass within the ancient walls of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, the quiet rhythms of lessons, meals, and student life slowly began to change under the growing shadow of events taking place beyond the castle grounds. The return of Lord Voldemort, which had once been dismissed by many people as rumor or exaggeration, was now becoming increasingly difficult for the wizarding world to ignore. Strange incidents, mysterious disappearances, and reports of dark magic appearing in different parts of the country spread through the magical community like distant thunder, announcing an approaching storm. At first, these reports traveled through whispers rather than official announcements, because many leaders within the Ministry of Magic had spent years denying that Voldemort had truly returned. Yet as more evidence began appearing and the attacks became more frequent, fear slowly replaced denial. Wizards and witches, who had once hoped the dark days of the past were gone forever, now realized that the danger they had feared was once again rising. Within Hogwarts, the news reached the castle in fragments, carried by letters from home, quiet conversations among teachers, and occasional warnings shared by the headmaster during gatherings in the Great Hall. Students began hearing about strange events happening in the outside world, and although the school remained a place of learning and safety, it was impossible to completely ignore the growing sense that something dangerous was approaching. For many members of the staff, the return of Voldemort represented the beginning of what would later be known as the Second Wizarding War. Those who had lived through the earlier conflict understood how quickly fear could spread once his followers began acting openly again. Memories of the previous war still lingered among older witches and wizards, and the idea that those dark years might repeat themselves created a quiet tension within the magical community. Among the people watching these developments with a mixture of anxiety and disbelief was Sybill Trelawney. Although she no longer held the official position of divination professor after her dismissal by Dolores Umbridge, she still lived within the castle under the protection offered by Albus Dumbledore. The North Tower had once been her domain as a teacher, yet now it served more as a quiet refuge, where she could remain close to the environment that had shaped her life. Sybill spent much of her time within the castle, often staying near the familiar room where she had once taught students how to read tea leaves and search for visions within crystal balls. Yet the atmosphere around her felt different from the peaceful years when divination lessons had filled the tower with curious students and the soft scent of incense drifting through the air. The conversations she overheard from teachers and students alike carried a tone of worry that had not existed before. The return of Voldemort did not immediately bring open battle to the grounds of Hogwarts, but the school slowly began preparing for the possibility that conflict might eventually reach even its protected walls. Security around the castle was strengthened through additional magical defenses, and the teachers remained alert for signs that danger might approach. Dumbledore and the staff understood that Hogwarts represented one of the most important places in the wizarding world, and protecting the students within its walls became their highest priority. For Sybill, the situation created a strange emotional conflict. As someone who had spent her life studying prophecy and searching for signs of the future, she could not ignore the possibility that the events unfolding around her might be connected to forces she had sensed long before. Although she did not remember the prophecies she had spoken during her trances, there was still a quiet awareness within her that the world sometimes moved according to patterns hidden beneath ordinary events. From the windows of the tower, she sometimes watched the grounds of Hogwarts stretching toward the distant forest, the same view she had seen for many years while living inside the castle. Yet the peaceful landscape now carried an unspoken tension. Students still walked across the lawns between classes, and the lake continued reflecting the sky as it always had. But beneath that ordinary scene lay the knowledge that the outside world was changing. Rumors about Voldemort's followers moving through the countryside reached the castle with increasing frequency. Families wrote letters to their children warning them to be careful, and some students spoke quietly about relatives who had experienced frightening encounters with dark magic. Although Hogwarts remained protected by powerful enchantments, the sense of safety that had once surrounded the school no longer felt as complete as it once had. Sybill often listened to these conversations with growing dread, because even though she could not clearly explain why, she felt that the future she had spent years trying to interpret might now be unfolding in ways that were far more dangerous than anything she had predicted during her lessons. Her dramatic warnings about disaster had once been treated with laughter by students who believed she exaggerated the risks hidden within everyday symbols. Now, however, the possibility of real danger no longer seemed distant or imaginary. At times, she returned to the habits that had defined her life for so long, studying patterns in tea leaves or gazing into crystal balls while searching for signs that might reveal how the conflict would unfold. Yet these efforts often brought more uncertainty than clarity. Divination had always been an art filled with symbols rather than clear answers, and the complexity of the coming war made it even more difficult to understand what the future might hold. Within the castle, the teachers continued their work, while quietly preparing for the possibility that the conflict might eventually reach them. Defensive spells were practiced more frequently, and the staff remained watchful for any sign that Voldemort's followers might attempt to target Hogwarts. Students sensed the seriousness of these preparations, even when they were not given full explanations. For Sybill Trelawney, the unfolding situation felt deeply unsettling, because she had spent her life speaking about the future in symbolic language that many people treated as theatrical exaggeration. Now the world around her was moving toward a real conflict that could affect everyone within the magical community. The war that had once seemed like a distant chapter in history was returning with frightening certainty. Standing near the windows of the tower where she had once taught divination, she often looked out across the grounds with a quiet sense of dread. The peaceful castle that had been her refuge for so many years might soon face the same dangers spreading across the wizarding world. And although she continued searching for signs of the future within the symbols she studied, the approaching conflict carried a weight that even her long fascination with prophecy could not fully prepare her to face. In the silence of those watchful moments, she remained within the castle that had become her home, surrounded by the same mysterious objects that had once filled her classroom with curiosity and laughter. Yet the future she had spent years trying to interpret was no longer a distant possibility whispered through symbols and visions. It was becoming a reality that moved closer with every passing day. The Battle of Hogwarts. The night when the final battle reached Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry did not arrive quietly or gently, because the tension that had been growing throughout the wizarding world finally gathered into a single moment when fear, courage, and desperation collided within the ancient stone walls of the castle. For years, the school had stood as a place of learning and protection, a sanctuary where students studied spells and magical theory beneath enchanted ceilings and moving staircases. Yet, on that night, the familiar halls were transformed into a battleground where the fate of the magical world would be decided. The forces of Lord Voldemort approached Hogwarts with the clear intention of breaking the resistance that had formed against his rule, and the defenders of the castle understood that the conflict could not be avoided any longer. Teachers, students, and allies gathered within the grounds to prepare for the attack, forming lines of defense and casting protective spells that strengthened the magical barriers surrounding the school. Even the ancient statues and enchanted armor within the castle were awakened to stand guard, creating an atmosphere that felt both magical and deeply unsettling. Inside the castle, the normal order of student life disappeared almost instantly. Corridors that had once echoed with the sound of footsteps between classes now filled with hurried voices, bursts of spell light, and the distant thunder of magical energy striking the protective barriers around the castle. Windows rattled as spells collided with the outer defenses, and the night sky above the towers glowed with flashes of color as the attacking forces attempted to break through. Amid this growing chaos stood Sybill Trelawney, a woman who had spent most of her life surrounded by symbols, visions, and quiet predictions, rather than open conflict. The North Tower had always been her refuge, a place where crystal balls rested peacefully on small tables, and where the future was studied through patterns in tea leaves, rather than through the violent reality of battle. Yet on this night, the war that had slowly been approaching the castle had finally arrived at her doorstep. At first, she remained near the tower, where she had once taught divination, watching the unfolding chaos with a mixture of fear and disbelief. The distant sounds of spells being cast echoed through the castle walls, and from the windows she could see flashes of light across the grounds where defenders and attackers clashed beneath the dark sky. For someone who had spent years speaking about danger and misfortune during her lessons, the reality of witnessing such destruction felt overwhelming. Yet, as the battle grew closer and the sounds of fighting moved deeper into the castle, Sybill realized that the conflict would not allow anyone to remain simply as a spectator. The defenders of Hogwarts were not limited to experienced warriors or skilled duelists. Every person within the castle had a role to play if the school was to survive the night. Sybill therefore found herself standing near the upper windows of the tower, looking down toward the chaos spreading across the grounds below. The familiar crystal balls that had once been tools for studying visions of the future still rested upon the tables around her, their smooth surfaces reflecting the flickering light from spells exploding in the distance. For many years, these crystal balls had been symbols of her profession, objects used to search for faint images that might reveal secrets about events yet to come. Students had once gathered around them with curiosity or amusement, trying to see shapes within the glass while listening to Sybill's dramatic explanations about what those shapes might mean. The objects had always represented quiet contemplation rather than action. But on this night, the future she had spent so long trying to interpret was no longer hidden within reflections or symbols. It was unfolding violently outside the castle walls, and the time for passive observation had passed. As figures belonging to Voldemort's forces, often called Death Eaters, began moving across the grounds and attempting to break into the castle itself, Sybill made a decision that surprised even herself. Instead of retreating further into the tower, she began gathering the crystal balls from the tables around the room. One by one, she carried them toward the windows, overlooking the battlefield. The action was simple, almost instinctive, yet it transformed the meaning of the objects she held. The crystal balls that had once been used for studying visions of the future were now becoming weapons used to defend the present. Standing at the window, she raised the first crystal ball and threw it downward toward the attackers below. The glass sphere fell through the night air before shattering against the ground with a sharp explosion of fragments. For a moment, the act must have felt strange and almost surreal, because she was destroying the very tools that had defined her life as a divination teacher. Yet, the moment passed quickly as the urgency of the battle demanded action rather than reflection. Again and again she lifted the crystal balls from the tables and hurled them from the tower window, sending them crashing down among the advancing enemies. The sound of breaking glass echoed upward through the night, mixing with the flashes of spells and the shouts of defenders fighting throughout the castle. Students and teachers who noticed this unusual defense might have been surprised to see the divination professor participating so directly in the battle. Many of them had only known her as the eccentric figure who spoke about mysterious signs and ominous predictions while surrounded by incense and symbolic objects. Seeing her throw crystal balls from the tower with determined energy revealed a different side of the woman who had once been dismissed by some as overly dramatic or fragile. The destruction of those crystal balls carried a strange symbolic meaning as well. For years they had represented the uncertain art of predicting the future, objects that reflected possibilities rather than clear answers. Now, as they shattered against the ground below, they marked the moment when the quiet study of prophecy gave way to the immediate reality of war. Sybill Trelawney, who had spent much of her life interpreting signs of danger within symbolic patterns, was now confronting that danger directly. The future she had often warned about during her lessons had finally arrived, and the tools she once used to study it were being sacrificed in defense of the castle she had called home for so many years. Throughout the night, the battle continued, spreading through the corridors and towers of Hogwarts, with defenders fighting fiercely to protect the students and the history contained within those ancient walls. The castle itself seemed to respond to the conflict, with enchanted objects moving through the halls and magical barriers shifting as the defenders attempted to hold back the attacking forces. Within the North Tower, the room that had once served as the divination classroom slowly emptied of the crystal balls that had decorated its tables. Each shattered sphere below represented both an act of defiance and a transformation in the role Sybill played during that historic night. The quiet professor who had once studied reflections within glass was now contributing to the defense of the castle in a way that no prophecy could have predicted. And as the battle raged across Hogwarts, the fragments of those crystal balls, scattered across the ground below, served as silent reminders that the future she had spent years attempting to foresee was now being decided through courage, sacrifice, and the determination of those willing to stand against darkness. The seer who survived. When the long and frightening conflict that had shaken the wizarding world finally came to an end, the silence that followed felt almost strange to many witches and wizards who had spent years living with fear and uncertainty. The defeat of Lord Voldemort marked the end of a struggle that had shaped an entire generation, and the magical community slowly began the difficult work of rebuilding a world that had been damaged by years of darkness. Families who had hidden from danger began returning to their homes. Magical villages that had once felt tense with suspicion slowly regained their familiar warmth, and the institutions that guided wizarding life tried to restore a sense of stability. Among the places that carried both the scars and the hope of this new beginning was Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, the ancient castle that had served not only as a place of education, but also as the location of the final battle that ended Voldemort's rise to power. The castle itself required careful restoration after the damage caused during that desperate night. Broken stone walls were repaired through powerful magic, shattered towers were rebuilt piece by piece, and the grounds that had once echoed with the sounds of spells and conflict slowly returned to their peaceful appearance. As the castle recovered, students returned once again to the halls that had taught generations of young witches and wizards. The familiar rhythm of school life began to return, with lessons filling the classrooms, conversations echoing through the corridors, and the great hall once again serving as a place where students gathered beneath the enchanted ceiling that reflected the sky above. The war had changed the world outside the castle, but Hogwarts remained a symbol of continuity, a place where knowledge and tradition continued despite the upheaval of recent years. Among the teachers who continued living and working within the castle after the war was Sybill Trelawney, the divination teacher, whose life had been shaped by a series of events that few people fully understood during the earlier years of her career. For a long time, she had been viewed by many students as an eccentric figure, someone who spoke in mysterious tones about omens and visions while surrounded by crystal balls, teacup, and drifting incense in the quiet tower classroom where divination lessons took place. Yet the passing of time and the events of the war slowly changed the way people thought about the strange and uncertain gift she possessed. While it was still true that many of her everyday predictions seemed dramatic or exaggerated, the deeper history of her life revealed something far more important. The 2 prophecies she had spoken during her rare trances had shaped the course of the wizarding world in ways that few people had recognized when those words were first spoken. The first prophecy had described the arrival of a child who would one day challenge the power of Voldemort, and that child had been Harry Potter, whose life became closely connected to the fate of the wizarding world. The second prophecy had foretold the return of the servant who would help restore Voldemort's strength, a warning that eventually proved true when hidden forces worked to bring the dark wizard back from the fragile state in which he had existed for many years. At the time those prophecies were delivered, Sybill herself had not even remembered speaking them once the trances ended. The words had passed through her voice without warning and without leaving a clear memory behind, which meant that she continued living her life without realizing the true importance of what she had said. Yet, as historians and scholars of magical history began examining the events surrounding the fall of Voldemort, the role played by those prophecies became impossible to ignore. In the years after the war, discussions about the nature of prophecy grew more serious within the wizarding community. Scholars studying the events that led to Voldemort's defeat often traced the chain of decisions and actions back to the moment when Sybill Trelawney first delivered the prophecy that described the child destined to oppose him. Without that prophecy being overheard and reported, the sequence of events that shaped the conflict might have unfolded in a completely different way. This realization created a quiet shift in how Sybill herself was viewed by many people. While some still considered divination an uncertain and imprecise discipline, others began recognizing that genuine prophetic moments, though rare and unpredictable, could carry enormous influence over the course of history. The idea that the divination professor at Hogwarts had unknowingly played a role in shaping the downfall of the most feared dark wizard of the age gave her story a significance that few had considered before. Despite these discussions taking place beyond the walls of the castle, Sybill's daily life remained largely unchanged. She continued teaching divination to new groups of students who climbed the spiral staircase leading to the North Tower classroom. The room still looked much as it had for many years, with small round tables arranged near the windows, crystal balls resting on soft cushions, and shelves filled with books that described ancient traditions of prophecy. During her lessons, she continued guiding students through familiar exercises, encouraging them to study the patterns formed by tea leaves in their cups, or to gaze into the depths of crystal balls while attempting to quiet their thoughts. Her voice still carried the same dramatic tone when she described possible omens or signs of change, and students often reacted with the same mixture of curiosity and skepticism that had followed divination classes for generations. Yet beneath the familiar style of her teaching, there existed a deeper awareness that the future could unfold in ways that even the most experienced seer could not fully understand. The events of the war had shown that prophecy was not simply a collection of mysterious symbols waiting to be interpreted. It was a force capable of shaping decisions, fears, and choices that influenced the entire wizarding world. For Sybill Trelawney, however, the idea that her life had played a role in the defeat of Voldemort was something she rarely spoke about openly. She continued living quietly within the castle, surrounded by the same objects and rituals that had defined her teaching for many years. The North Tower remained her refuge, a place where the uncertain art of divination could be practiced away from the noise and distraction of the lower corridors. Students who attended her lessons sometimes heard rumors about the prophecies connected to her name, and those rumors often sparked new curiosity about the subject she taught. While some still laughed at the dramatic style of her warnings, others listened more carefully, wondering whether the strange symbols she described might carry deeper meaning than they had first assumed. History, which often takes time to fully understand the importance of certain events, slowly began reconsidering the role Sybill Trelawney had played in one of the most important conflicts in magical history. The woman who had once been dismissed by critics as unreliable or theatrical had in fact delivered the prophecy that placed Voldemort on the path toward his eventual defeat. And so the seer who had unknowingly helped shape the fall of darkness continued her life within the castle that had witnessed both her struggles and her quiet significance. Surrounded by crystal balls, drifting incense, and the curious faces of new students eager to understand the mysteries of the future, Sybill Trelawney remained exactly what she had always been. A messenger of prophecy whose greatest visions had spoken through her voice long before the world was ready to understand them. Years after the war had ended, and the wizarding world slowly found its balance again, the tall towers of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry still rose above the hills of Scotland, just as they had for centuries, their ancient stone walls holding the quiet memory of countless stories that had unfolded within them. The castle had always been more than a place of education, because every hallway, staircase, and tower had witnessed moments of courage, fear, friendship, and loss that shaped the lives of those who passed through its gates. Time moved forward as new generations of students arrived each year, yet the castle itself seemed to exist outside the ordinary rhythm of history, preserving echoes of the past within its silent corridors. High above those corridors stood the North Tower, the same quiet place where the study of divination had continued for many years. From the outside, the tower looked unchanged, its narrow windows opening toward the distant landscape where the lake reflected the sky and the forest stretched beyond the edge of the grounds. Inside the tower classroom, the atmosphere remained familiar to anyone who had climbed the winding staircase to reach it. The room still held the soft glow of lamps that created warm shadows across the walls, and the faint scent of incense drifted slowly through the air, as though time itself moved more gently within that space. Small round tables were arranged across the floor, each one holding delicate teacups, saucers, and crystal balls that rested quietly upon their cushions. The objects looked almost identical to the ones that had filled the room years earlier when students first began attending lessons in the mysterious art of divination. At one of the tables, a group of students leaned forward while studying the patterns left behind in their teacups, turning the cups slowly in their hands while trying to decide whether the scattered leaves formed shapes that meant anything at all. Some whispered to one another about the symbols they thought they could see, pointing out shapes that resembled animals, letters, or strange twisting lines that might represent journeys or changes in the future. The scene was almost identical to the lessons that had taken place in that room for many years, because the practice of divination had always relied on quiet observation and imagination. Students searched for meaning within patterns that might easily be dismissed as random, yet the possibility that those shapes could reveal hidden truths about the future kept them studying the cups with careful attention. Standing near the front of the room was Sybill Trelawney, whose familiar figure remained surrounded by the flowing shawls and large glasses that had become part of her reputation within the castle. Time had passed since the years when the wizarding world faced the return of Lord Voldemort. Yet Sybill's presence in the North Tower still carried the same mixture of mystery and drama that students had known for generations. She spoke softly to the students about the symbols they believed they had discovered in their cups, explaining how certain shapes might suggest travel, danger, or unexpected opportunity. Her voice still carried the theatrical rhythm that many students found both amusing and fascinating, and occasionally a quiet ripple of laughter moved through the room when one of the predictions sounded particularly dramatic. Yet beneath that familiar atmosphere, something had changed in the way people thought about the woman standing in the center of the classroom. In earlier years, many students had treated her predictions as entertainment rather than serious insight, believing that divination was little more than a collection of symbolic guesses about the future. The war and the events that followed it had quietly reshaped that perception. Historians of the wizarding world had spent years studying the chain of events that led to Voldemort's defeat, and during that process, they returned again and again to the moment when Sybill Trelawney had delivered the prophecy that described the child who would one day challenge him. That prophecy had set a series of actions into motion, influencing decisions made by both allies and enemies, until the story eventually reached its final confrontation at Hogwarts. The strange truth was that Sybill herself had never remembered speaking those words once the trance ended. She had continued living her life as a divination teacher, guiding students through tea leaves and crystal balls, while the prophecy she delivered slowly shaped the destiny of the wizarding world. It was only later, when scholars and historians examined the past with careful attention, that the full importance of her role became clear. The legacy she left behind, therefore, became complicated and difficult to describe with simple words. On one hand, she was still the eccentric divination professor who filled the tower classroom with incense and mysterious warnings about the future. Students still whispered jokes about her dramatic predictions, and many of them still approached the subject of divination with the same mixture of curiosity and doubt that had always surrounded it. On the other hand, the story of her life revealed something deeper and more surprising. The woman who had often been dismissed as unreliable had in fact spoken one of the most important prophecies in magical history. Without realizing it, she had become the voice through which the future announced itself, setting into motion the events that eventually led to the fall of the most feared dark wizard of the age. As the students in the classroom continued studying the shapes inside their teacups, the quiet tower seemed almost like a place where the past and future touched each other gently. The same room that had once echoed with laughter at Sybill's dramatic warnings now carried a subtle awareness that prophecy was not always easy to recognize when it first appeared. Sometimes, the future arrived disguised as coincidence, spoken through voices that even the speaker did not fully understand. Sometimes, the people who seemed most uncertain about their abilities were the very ones chosen by fate to deliver words that would echo through history. Sybill Trelawney remained at the center of that mystery, moving between the tables while offering interpretations of symbols that might or might not reveal anything important. Her life continued much as it always had, filled with the rituals of divination and the quiet belief that the future left clues scattered throughout the present. Outside the windows of the North Tower, the sky stretched across the hills surrounding Hogwarts, calm and peaceful in a way that might have seemed impossible during the dark days of the war. The castle below remained filled with the voices of students who would one day leave its halls and shape the wizarding world in their own ways. Inside the tower, the students slowly finished their tea leaf readings, while Sybill offered one last reflection about the nature of prophecy. The future, she reminded them, rarely reveals itself in clear and obvious ways. Instead, it hides within patterns, choices, and moments that seem ordinary until time passes and their meaning becomes clear. And perhaps that idea carried a quiet truth about her own story as well, because sometimes the people we laugh at, the ones who seem unusual or uncertain, are the very individuals whose words quietly guide the direction of history. Sometimes the voice that changes the world belongs to someone standing in a dim tower classroom, surrounded by teacups and crystal balls, speaking about the future without realizing that the future is already listening. As our story gently comes to an end, the towers of Hogwarts' School of Witchcraft and Wizardry stand quietly beneath the night sky, their ancient stones resting under the calm glow of distant stars. The halls that once carried footsteps, whispers, and the echoes of history now settle into peaceful silence, as though the castle itself is slowly drifting into sleep. High in the North Tower, the room where Sybill Trelawney once guided students through tea leaves and crystal balls sits quietly in the soft light of fading lamps. Teacups rest where they were left, and the last traces of incense drift gently through the air, while the future so often searched for in symbols and reflections remains calm and patient beyond the window. Perhaps the quiet truth of this story is that the future is not always shaped by the loudest voices or the most obvious heroes. Sometimes it is guided by the quiet observers, the misunderstood dreamers, the ones whose words seem small until time reveals their meaning. And now, as the castle sleeps and the night grows still, you can let your thoughts drift gently into rest, knowing that somewhere above the silent halls, the quiet tower is watching the stars.